Chapter 1 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. Chapter 1 Skulkers in the Night. Long, loud, and clear rose the baying howl in the dark. It sounded like an outlaw trumpet, calling to raid and plunder. The calm of the June evening seemed to flee as though startled. Randy Hunter's tanned young face looked at Jeb's Markham's square, ruddy one as they sat together in the jeep. Each saw in the other's eyes a nervous mystification. The big farmer standing at the roadside chuckled, not very jovially. "You're hearing a wild dog, boys," he said. "I reckon there ain't nobody in North Carolina tough enough to keep from shivering when he hears that."
"Wild dog?" repeated Jebs, his voice shaking a bit. "Shoot, mister, I didn't recognize dogs ever went wild. A dog's tame. Man's best friend."
"Tame animals go wild sometimes, son," replied the farmer. "There's a pack of 'em here in Drowning Creek country. They've given us a sight of trouble lately. I figure they might be dangerous to more than pigs and chickens, too." Again rose the bugling howl from somewhere off in the swampy timber above which was rising a round full moon. Another dog voice, yapping and quivery, joined in. "Round here we named that loudest one Bugler," went on the farmer. He was a sturdy, healthy man, bareheaded and dungareed, and his heavy black hair had a grayish sheen like wrought iron. "One or two fellows has even seen him. He's a big scudder, with black spots on white and a sharp nose. Now, what'd you start asking me when that Bugler dog sort of butted in?"
I'm Randy Hunter, and this is my friend Jebs Markham," Randy said again. "We live in Moore County. We're looking for a place called Chimney Pot House."
"Well, my name's James Martin, and yonder's my place." The farmer jerked his iron black head toward a cheerfully lighted house 100 yards along the road. "Chimney Pot. Ain't that the old place where they dug up the money last fall? Ain't they building a new house and getting ready to work the land again?"
"Yes, sir," said Jebs. "It belongs to Driscoll Jordan. He's a friend of ours. He wrote that they'd cut a new road through the woods to reach it, and he wanted us to drive out with this jeep he'd ordered."
"I've met Driscoll," said James Martin. "Likewise that great big tall partner of his, Sam Cohill, the one they say used to be a circus giant. Sam worked all winter, starting to fix up the place while Driscoll was in school. They're good neighbors. I've been letting my hired hand, Willie Dubbin, go over and help them out."
"But the road?"
began Randy. "Oh, sure enough, they've got a road. Keep going for half a mile and you'll see the turnoff at the right. It's not wide, but it's new. You'll spot it." Again the bugling call sounded, and the night seemed to grow darker by a shade or so. "If I was you two," said James Martin, "I'd go find that house right quick. Willie Dubbin tells me it ain't healthy to walk these woods after dark. He hates to hear the wild dogs singing their hymns."
"Thanks a heap, Mr. Martin,"
said Jebs, shifting gears and starting the jeep again. The gray twilight had faded into gloom. Jebs switched the headlights from dim to full, and they blazed against the rutted clay of the road.
"Feels chilly all of a sudden for June," remarked Jebs.
"Hark at that Bugler dog sound off again. He sounds closer, or maybe I'm getting jumpy." "You and me both," said Randy. "Why didn't Driscoll write something about those dog packs prowling around his old ancestral home? I thought we'd have a nice quiet week helping him get things shaped up." Suddenly Jebs craned his neck above the steering wheel.
"It looks like our turnoff right up ahead."
He cut the jeep's speed to a crawl. At the right of the road, a stretch of the ditch had been filled in over some drain tile. It gave an approach to a narrow way that dived in among the dark trees. The jeep's wheels found the ruts, waddled around a curve, then another curve. The road to Chimney Pot was barely more than wide enough for the jeep to pass. The heavy foliage, crowding in on either hand and above their heads, shut out what little light remained. "This is just a trail," said Randy, more to make conversation than anything. "It reminds me of how the trees jam around and over Drowning Creek. Remember, Jebs?"
"I'm not forgetting,"
replied Jebs. This little path twists and curves like a snake," went on Randy. "Sam must have run it every which way to avoid too much cutting work. Say, I'll be glad to see Sam and Driscoll again." Once again the bugling howl resounded, and to both boys it seemed almost oppressively close at hand. "I'll be glad to see him, too," announced Jebs feelingly. "See him inside a house, with bright lights and a good stout door with a big lock on it." He steered the Jeep around more curves. "Say, Jebs," ventured Randy. "Say it." "I picked up a crazy notion that we're not moving alone. I keep imagining that there's something, a bunch of somethings, trotting along, keeping pace with us, beyond the trees to each side." "I sure hope it's just imagination," said Jebs, "'cause I've got the same feeling. I wish that Mr. James Martin had hushed up his talk about wild dogs and how dangerous they might be. This is kind of an open car, this Jeep. What if that big spotted one they call Bugler came hopping in here with us?" "I'd hop right out and let him have my place," vowed Randy. "Hop out, would you?" Jebs laughed nervously. "Don't forget, that Bugler mutt has a bunch of friends running around with him. You might find yourself the guest of honor among them." "Look there ahead," said Randy. "Isn't that light through the trees?" "That's just your vivid imagination, Randy. It must be nearly 3 miles to Chimney Pot, and we'll have to go farther than that with all these S-curves. What if we ran out of gas all of a sudden?" "We won't," Randy almost snapped. "They filled the tank at Carpenter's garage in Pine Bluff before we started. We haven't gone more than 30 miles so far. We could drive all night on the gas we're carrying." "Maybe we could, but I don't crave to," said Jebs somberly. "Not in woods all busted out with wild dogs, feeling frisky and hungry and mean." "Now who's got vivid imagination?" challenged Randy, but without triumph. The thought of a pack of prowling, masterless dogs on a galloping hunt through dense, swampy woods was new to Randy, but none the more welcome for its novelty. On top of that, this great expanse of timber, uncut and almost unexplored for nearly a century of North Carolina history, held for Randy and Jebs memories of strange and sometimes frightening adventure. It was here, not far from the woods-cloaked shores of Drowning Creek, that the two boys had found their fill of excitement. They had helped Driscoll Jordan search for the half-forgotten ruins of the old Jordan home and its secret of hidden treasure, and they'd found not only both house and treasure, but also a strange hermit who was to become their friend, Sam Cohill, the giant ex-star of a sideshow who lacked only 1 inch of being 8 feet tall, with a brain and heart big enough to match his monstrous body. Now Driscoll, using the money he had found, was restoring Chimney Pot House, and Sam Cohill was his partner. Randy admit what he said about looking forward to a peaceful visit to their friends in the newly built quarters. He glanced right and left at the huge trunks and the intervening clumps and thickets of brush bordering the narrow winding road. He could not throw off the fancy, if it was a fancy, that they were accompanied by stealthy, watchful beasts, keeping pace just out of sight on either hand. "Now I do see a flash of light," said Jebs after a while. "Maybe it was just the moon shining on a leaf. There it is again. Wait till we haul around this curve." Randy peered too. "I see it. It blinked through the trees yonder, and I never saw a light that looked any more welcome." They emerged into an open stretch, where the moonlight showed them a meandering brook, a tributary of Drowning Creek, that forced back the trees on either side of it. The Jeep bumped over ruts beside the trickle, and Jebs turned sharply to cross a rough, sturdy wooden bridge that boomed like a drum under the tires. Beyond were the lights, plain to see, 2 comforting yellow patches at 2 windows. "Everything's okay now," whooped Jebs. He drove into the yard, put on the brake, and turned the key in the ignition. The motor ceased its song. Just then, very close to their side, rose a stealthy, menacing growl. Another voice chimed in just ahead. "The dogs!" gasped Jebs, pointing. In the gleam of the headlights shone 2 eyes, bright and green and fierce. 2 more eyes moved slowly forward in shadows beyond. "They're coming at us, Randy!" warned Jebs, rising in his seat. Then rose a furious, snarling war cry. Yet another dog, his swift white body cleaving the dimness, charged from somewhere near the lighted windows. "That one's going to—" Randy began. But the white dog drove not at the Jeep, but at the 2 pairs of eyes in front of it. There was a gasping growl, a click of teeth, and the night was split by a high screech of pain. A tall, wide door flew open between the windows. In its big oblong of light towered an enormous figure. "Get 'em, rebel!" boomed a great voice they knew, and the lantern swung high in an enormous hand, lighting up the dark dooryard. "Who's out there?" demanded the big voice. "Look out! A dog's chasing some wild curs!"
"Sam Cohill!" yelled back Jebs gratefully. "It's us! Jebs Markham and Randy Hunter!"
Feet hurried away through the night around them. The white dog from the house paused in the glow of the headlights. He stood stiff-legged and tense and ready. Randy saw his long, square-tipped muzzle, the flash of his sharp fighting fangs, his small pointed ears cocked forward as though listening to the retreat of his foes. "These boys are all right, rebel," came Sam Cohill's booming tones. "Come on in, you two. We're glad you're here."
"You aren't gladder than we are,"
said Jebs heartily as he groped into the rear of the Jeep for his suitcase.
"Let's get inside, Randy. Quick!"
End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording's in the public domain. Chapter 2. Night at Chimney Pot. "Come inside, boys, come inside." Sam Cohill's hospitable roar resounded about them as they carried their bags to the big stone doorstep. Holding his lantern high, the giant beamed down at them. His strong-featured face was as big as a meat platter, and through his pointed brown beard his teeth gleamed like a set of piano keys. "This is like old times, only better," he said. "Driscoll, here they are." As Randy stepped across the threshold into a spacious room, a boy of his own age started forward with a smile of welcome. Driscoll Jordan looked his old self, lean, sun-browned, and dark-haired. One sinewy hand gripped Randy's, the other reached toward Jeb's.
"Did you have any trouble finding your way?"
he asked.
"Not a bit," replied Jeb sarcastically. "We had a whole escort of wild dogs to show us in, and raise a cheer for us in your front yard."
Sam Cohill had shut the tall door. "It must have been the noise of the Jeep that attracted them," he said. "That and the headlights."
"They didn't attract us," announced Randy bleakly. "You never mentioned the wild dogs in your letters, Driscoll. A neighbor of yours, a man named Mr. James Martin, told us about him. Then we had a close look for ourselves." "We'll fill you in on the wild dogs pretty soon," said Driscoll, "when you're settled in. Are you hungry? Sam and I are about to have some late supper." "We had a bite before we started out," said Jebs, "but not so big a bite we can't munch something else. Hey, Randy, look at Sam. Isn't he the fashion plate?"
Both boys gazed at the grinning giant. In the days when Sam Cohill had lived as a recluse in the ruins of Chimney Pot House, he had looked almost fearsomely rough in his homemade clothing. Now he wore well-cut trousers of brown gabardine. His green corduroy shirt, almost as big as a pup tent, was zippered in front, and its collar spread open to show his great corded neck. On his big feet were moccasins of heavy oil-tanned leather, with double soles and sturdily welted seams. Above them showed ungartered socks of gay pattern. Sam's beard was trimmed to a narrow point like a lance head. It made him look like an old-fashioned doctor. His once wild mane of hair had also been clipped, parted on the left side and swept back on the right.
"Food's all ready in the kitchen," said Driscoll. "How do you like new Chimney Pot House?"
They glanced around the front room. It was massively timbered as to unfinished walls and high rafters, with a plank floor on which lay rag rugs. Furniture included a studio couch, a center table, and several sturdy armchairs, one of them a size to accommodate Sam Cohill's body. Bookshelves lined one wall. Opposite showed a big stone fireplace. Above this hung Driscoll's faithful machete in its leather scabbard, and also Driscoll's favorite headgear, the old Confederate army cap that he had inherited from his great-grandfather. A kerosene lamp burned brightly on the table.
"It's comfortable without being fancy," said Randy after a moment. "Fancy things aren't always the comfortable ones," agreed Driscoll. "Here's the kitchen door, beyond the fireplace. Notice that all the doors are 8 feet tall. That gives Sam 1 inch of clearance to pass through without bumping his head."
Another lamp lighted the kitchen, which was not much smaller than the big front room. On an oil stove simmered a large kettle and a small one, and a spicily appetizing odor filled the air. "We have spaghetti tonight," announced Sam. "Grab plates and stand by to take on cargo." From the big kettle he forked bale-like masses of spaghetti into plate after plate. Upon each white mound he scooped thick red sauce from the smaller pot. "Grated Parmesan cheese is in the shaker on the table," he said. "Get coffee cups, too. And there's a bowl of green onions in the refrigerator." It was an electric refrigerator, but when Jebs opened it to get the onions, he saw that it was kept cool by a big block of ice in a dishpan.
"The ice comes to Mr. Martin's from Wagram every other day, and we've been picking it up there," explained Driscoll. "It's a long, cold walk getting it here, too. I'm glad we'll have our own refrigerator working in a few days."
"How'll you get it working?" inquired Randy.
"Mr. Martin has rural electrification power at his house now, and Sam and I bought his old home power plant second-hand."
"Dig in," urged Sam. With energetic appetites, they attacked the spaghetti.
"It's right good," praised Jebs. "What you made it?"
"I did," Sam's informed him. "I learned to make that sauce from an Italian knife thrower during my circus days."
"Well, what's in it?"
inquired Randy. "There's ground beef in it," said Sam. "Likewise tomato paste and chopped onions and garlic and fresh green pepper and crushed red pepper and Worcestershire sauce and walnut catsup and other seasonings. Marjoram, thyme, rosemary, lots of salt, black pepper."
"Is that all?"
demanded Jebs with his mouth full. "No, come to think of it, there's also a pinch of chili powder. That's my own idea, not the Italian knife throwers."
"I'm still bowled over at how snappy Sam looks these days," spoke up Randy, mopping sauce from his plate.
"Well, I get out among people a lot more than I used to," smiled the big man. "I visit Wagram, sometimes Laurenburg, Rockingham, Lumberton, and I spent some of my share of our treasure on getting some new clothes built."
"You don't know the half of it, Randy,"
put in Driscoll.
"A Laurenburg tailor cut him a sports jacket that's the sharpest thing I ever seen in the Drowning Creek country, and Sam sent up north for dress shirts and a couple of pairs of specially made Oxfords."
"The church ladies in Wagram knitted me lots of socks," said Sam.
"Yeah, Sam's right popular in Wagram," Driscoll told his friends. "He did some strong-arm stunts at a school party, and every kid in that school wants to grow up as big as Sam. I heard all about it all the way up north to Lawson."
They finished supper, Big Sam Cohill eating as much as all three of the boys, and while they washed the dishes, Driscoll told his friends more news. While he, Driscoll, had attended high school in Lawson County, where he lived with his guardian, Deputy Sheriff Bailey, Sam had supervised initial work at reclaiming the long-lost site of Chimney Pot House. A crew of workmen had salvaged from the old ruins enough cut stones to build a new foundation and solid, massive old beams for the framework. One ancient 30-acre field, unused since the fall of the Confederacy, had been cleared and its timber sold, and Mr. Martin's farmhand, Willie Dubbin, had plowed the land and planted it to corn.
"We'll need that corn because this summer we'll buy more stock to raise here," finished Driscoll. "Mr. Martin sold us a couple of calves. We've added to Sam's pen full of pigs, and we got chickens, too. We'll go slow on cutting more timber. What I want is to work with a lumbering outfit that will leave the younger trees to come on. That way the place will be a permanent profit, and the forest will never be ruined." "Amen to that idea, Driscoll," applauded Jebs as he put away the coffee cups. "But won't the wild dogs bother your stock?"
At that moment he started violently, almost dropping a cup. A whine sounded at the kitchen door, and something scratched at its panels.
"Take it easy, Jebs, that's Rebel,"
laughed Driscoll.
"I reckon the wild ones have pulled out, and he wants to get in."
Sam opened the door, and in trotted the white dog they had seen outside. He was a clean-limbed specimen, both lean and sinewy, and his hair was short and smooth. His muzzle looked fairly long, but square and strong. Both his ears and his tail were cropped close. He looked at Jebs and Randy with wise eyes, and thrust his nose into Driscoll's hand.
"I got Rebel 2 years ago," said Driscoll, "and last fall I sent him down here to keep Sam company."
"What kind is he?" asked Randy. "There aren't many a Rebel's breed to be found these days," said Sam. "He's a pit bull terrier, and I don't see why they aren't popular any more. A smarter, braver, more loyal dog was never created than Rebel and his kind." "He must be worth having around with wild dogs besieging you," said Randy.
How about telling us about that mysterious pack?
Come into the front room.
Sam led the way. When all had seated themselves, he began.
I lived here for years with no suspicion of anything like wild dogs. But lately, after the work started on this new house, I noticed them nosing around at evening, and one or two of the farmers near our part of the woods say the dogs have bothered their stock. One lost 2 sheep, another a bunch of chickens. Right here, around Easter time, they grabbed one of my pigs. Rebel and I managed to chase them away.
Doesn't anybody try to hunt them down? Asked Jebs.
Well, it's ticklish work hunting dogs, said Sam. Suppose you kill a dog, and it turns out to be somebody's household pet, out on a peaceful moonlight stroll. You get into big trouble with the somebody. Anyway, these dogs aren't easy to trace. They don't seem to have any special lair, and they fade away fast if they're followed.
Tame dogs ought to find them, suggested Randy.
Some tame dogs have found them, replied Sam. Dogs on various farms show up now and then, pretty badly chewed up.
Have any wild dogs ever chewed up Rebel? Randy asked. I reckon you don't know much about pit bull terriers, chimed in Driscoll, somewhat scornfully. Rebel does the chewing if he catches a wild dog, which isn't often. That neighbor of yours, Mr. Martin, says his hired man doesn't want any wild dogs to get close to him, said Jebs.
Well, you mean Willie Dubbin, and I don't blame him, rejoined Sam. 1 or 2 younger boys on the farms have been scared by the wild dogs. They met them out fishing or rambling, and the boys have been glad to run away fast. The pack acts dangerous and a little bit hungry.
It sounded baleful. Randy felt a shiver run up his back. Jebs, too, looked unnaturally serious. Nobody's been hurt yet, I suppose? Said Jebs.
Not yet, but I've been worried about one fellow, said Sam. A blind man named Hobart Tasman.
Blind man? Repeated Jebs and Randy in chorus.
He lives by himself in the woods, maybe a mile from here. That's deep into the old Jordan property, but we won't bother him because he hasn't done anything to bother about. Somebody helped him build his cabin about the time you boys showed up here for the first time last September. He's not exactly helpless. He finds his way around without eyes in a fashion to surprise you. I think he has a little money of his own, and he earns more by making pottery and shipping it off.
Sounds interesting, nodded Randy.
He is, but he doesn't welcome strangers. Once or twice I tried to be neighborly, but he acted as if he wished I'd stay away. Blind or not, he had heard I'm 8 feet tall, lacking an inch, and it seemed to bother him. I asked some of the Drowning Creek Indians to look in once in a while. They run errands for him, and now and then they carry in a crate of his pottery to ship away. Those Indians are good people. They don't notice when you snub them, not if they're set on doing you a favor.
If wild dogs get after a blind man, began Randy.
That's what I said to Tasman, but he says he could handle his own affairs. I can understand that. I used to want to be left alone.
Sam paused as though remembering his own hermit days.
But why go on with this stuff? What about your own news?
It was a deliberate change of subject, but both Randy and Jebs were willing to forget wild dogs for the moment. Well, we've been in school like Driscoll, said Jebs. High school at Aberdeen. Randy's quarterback in the football team. It's only a 6-man football, but that can be fast and rough. It must be with 6 men doing the work of 11, nodded Driscoll. We play 11-man football up our way, but I'm only a second-string tackle. How'd you make out last season? Pretty fair, though Southern Pines kind of knocked down our ears, said Jebs. Randy made the only touchdown that day. Jebs didn't tell you he's on the team, too, interposed Randy. He's one of the best centers Aberdeen ever had. Shoo, all I have to do is pass the ball back, grinned Jebs. Randy and the others have all the work, moving it forward again.
The talk went on, eager and friendly. The four recalled their earlier adventures and predicted exciting new ones to come. Finally, Jebs yawned.
Sorry to act like a country boy, he said, but I'm going to bed early.
Driscoll rose and opened another door.
Bunk in here. Bring in your stuff, both of you.
Against one wall of the room stood a double-decker bunk, both its levels made up with army blankets.
Which do you take, Randy? asked Jebs. Upper or lower?
Upper, I guess, said Randy.
I'm tired, too.
We'd better all get in the sack, boomed Sam Cohill from the front room. You may think you're guests, but tomorrow we put you both to work.
That's what we came for, said Randy.
Well, good night, Sam. Good night, Driscoll. Pulling the door shut, he sat down on a split-bottom chair, unlacing his shoes in the dark. It's peaceful here, he began. Hark! Interrupted Jebs. Somewhere in the night outside rose the long, clear howl of Bugler, the chief of the wild dogs. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3 The Lonely Blind Man. The rising sun prodded through the dense trees and in at the window when Randy opened his eyes, stretched, and swung down from his bunk. The thud of his feet on the floor wakened Jebs, too, and they could hear the heavy tread of Sam Cohill in the front room. Hurriedly they washed at the stand in one corner, raced into dungarees and crew shirts, and walked out through the front room into the kitchen. Driscoll joined them there, where Sam Cohill was already bending over the oil stove. "Breakfast," he greeted the boys. "Oatmeal and milk, scrambled eggs, bacon."
"You're giving us a working man's breakfast," said Jebs. "I hope we don't have to earn it the hard way." "You'll see," smiled Driscoll. They disposed of the meal, quickly washed the dishes, and all four went out of the kitchen door to look at new Chimney Pot House by the light of the climbing sun. Randy and Jebs saw that the new house stood closer to the stream than had the old one, that an ancient ruin had been raised and its discarded remains flung into the hole of its cellar. The present dwelling was a sizable square structure among the surrounding trees. Its outer walls were of perpendicular planks, with the junctures covered by small strips, and oiled to give a rustic brown effect. A big chimney rose from the center of the roof, which, with its shallow pitch and widely jutting eaves, showed a black expanse of heavy tar paper.
"This is a good time to get that roof shingled," announced Sam. "One of you climb up there with Driscoll. I weigh more than 400 pounds, and I'd better not strain any rafters or shielding boards." Randy paused as Jebs walked farther on toward a lean-to shed behind the house.
"Where are the shingles?" asked Randy. "We make our own out here," Driscoll told him.
"Look there," and Sam waved a scoop-like hand to where, supported on a loose row of short lengths of wood, lay bundle after bundle of thick, sturdy wooden slips. "When we decided to build last fall, I chopped down a fair-sized cypress tree down there toward Drowning Creek. The workmen sawed into it in the right lengths and stacked them up to season all winter. A few days ago I borrowed a wedge and a maul from James Martin and split those cypress chunks up into shingles. Shakes, they were called in the old days. They're double thick and double tough, and if they're put on right, they'll last for years."
"Here comes Willie Dubbin," said Driscoll, and across the bridge rolled a light wagon drawn by a mule. It was driven by an overalled man of spidery thinness. He reined in close to the group and got out, rumpling an old wool hat while Driscoll introduced him to Randy. Willie Dubbin might have been as young as 25 or as old as 40. Everything about him was long and thin. His neck, his arms and legs, his nose, his chin, his rumpled dark hair. He had bright, close-set eyes and a mouth that fell open when he smiled. "Master Jimmy thought I'd better spare the time to cut up that ground between the corn rows," he drawled. "Everything all right hereabout?"
"All right, except a few wild dogs nosing around last night," said Sam Cohill, towering above the skinny figure. Willie Dubbin looked up and blinked his bright eyes.
"Gentlemen, hush," he said. "Them dogs was around here, was they? If I was you all, I'd bid goodbye to this here place and get myself plumb away. I don't relish ever hearing about them dogs. I wouldn't stay out here nights, not for no pay whatsoever."
"Why did dogs bother you?" Randy ventured to ask, and Willie Dubbin looked at him plaintively.
"If'n they wasn't nothing but ordinary natural dogs, I wouldn't pay 'em no mind," he said. "But you can't tell me they ain't sort of hainted like, especially hanging round out here where they used to be haints."
"We proved that old story was just talk," put in Sam, but Willie waved the words away.
"Them dogs is smarter and meaner than anything with ordinary dog ways," he pronounced. "They got more'n the dog's smartness to guide and direct 'em. I don't want to even talk about 'em, I tell you. Reckon I'll get out that corn."
He mounted the wagon again. Inside, Randy could see, was a light plow. Willie clicked his tongue at the mule and drove past the house toward where the cleared land was located.
"Willie wouldn't be happy if he didn't have some superstition to worry over," said Driscoll, bringing a ladder and propping it against the eaves. "You coming up with me, Randy?"
"Right," said Randy. "But what's Jeb's poking after in the shed yonder?"
"Oh, that's our tool shed," replied Driscoll. "And Jeb seemed to be interested in the home electric power plant Mr. Martin sold us. We'll have to get a gasoline engine and a belt to make it run." "Don't waste your money on any engines," said Jebs, strolling back from the shed door. "Look yonder, there's your power." He pointed past the house toward the stream.
"That's not much more than a trickle,"
objected Sam Cohill, his hay-fork fingers smoothing his pointed beard.
"But the trickle's a fast one," argued Jebs. "And if we dam it up there where the banks rises high, we can make a regular little waterfall. Then a water wheel can power the electric plant."
"You got something there, Jebs," said Sam. "It was such a simple idea we never thought of it. Let's go down and see if we can plan out a dam project."
"I'm your man,"
said Jebs, and they walked away together, striding giant and sturdy youth. Rebel trotted along with them. Randy and Driscoll lugged bundles of shingles up the ladder, and with hammers and nails began to lay a course of them along the eaves. It was slow work at first, but as they worked they gained skill, speed, and assurance. The first line of shingles was double, the top layer overlapping the bottom so as to cover all cracks. They laid the second course with the thick butt of each new shingle overlapping the thinner ends of the course below. From the roof Randy could see more of the changes at Chimney Pot. Where once brushy thickets had matted the ground down to the very edge of the stream, all was cleared except the larger trees. Around the house rose a group of tall longleaf pines, like living masts, and many feet above ground their shaggy crowns of dense needles came together to make a pleasant but not dense shade. Behind the house a clear stretch was cultivated for a garden, and more distant still could be seen one corner of the cornfield where Willie Dubbin had begun work. Along the garden's edge were ranged smaller structures, a hen house with high wire fence, a slant-roofed shed, and a stockade-like rectangle of high upright planks.
"That fort you're looking at is our pig pen," explained Driscoll. "And we built up the chicken fence, too. We want to baffle any wild dogs that come to fetch pigs or chickens away."
Randy drove another nail. "Look down toward the water," he said. "Sam and Jebs are up to something." Jebs knelt by the stream, pointing to its bed and talking swiftly. Sam Cohill straddled his long legs from bank to bank, like the Colossus of Rhodes come to life. He listened to Jebs and nodded in agreement. He went tramping toward a great stack of felled trees and saplings, the mass that had been cleared away months before to make a space for new Chimney Pot House. In one hand he carried an axe. Choosing a jack oak stem nearly a foot thick at the large end, Sam severed its branchy top with 3 mighty single-handed strokes. Still using the axe like a hatchet, he sliced off the remaining boughs and lightly bore the log back to where Jebs waited. He put it crosswise above the water, then returned to chop out another log. Meanwhile, Jebs poked along the watercourse, picking up good-sized chunks of rock and lugging them back to the log.
"Where did Jebs learn about dams?" inquired Driscoll. "From some engineer?"
"Oh, from a mighty good one. A beaver. You know, the government put a few beaver colonies into the Moore County streams about a dozen years back, and Jeb is a beaver watcher the way some folks are bird watchers. He spent hours and days sneaking around to see them building their dams and underwater dens." The morning passed, with progress made both on the roof and down at the stream. Shortly before noon, Sam came and stood under the newly shingled eaves.
"Dinner time," he called. "Between hauls at the dam, I put on a kettle to boil chickens and dumplings. One of you go hail Willie Dubbin."
Driscoll trotted away to do this, and Randy went to join Jebs and look at the dam. The 2 long oak logs lay parallel, with a yard's interval between them. Against each of them, Jebs and Sam had driven a line of upright stakes about an inch apart. The water boiled a little as it found its way through these.
"Well, put smaller sticks crosswise and fill in between with stones and earth," said Jebs. "Then we'll fix a sluiceway at the right point and some kind of spout to carry the water out to strike the wheel. What was that Sam said about chicken and dumplings?"
At dinner, Jebs brought out pencil and paper to the kitchen table and made sketches to show his theories of dam, wheel, and power principle. Willie Dubbin ate heartily, but his close-set eyes gazed raptly at the diagrams as though he were trying to understand them, without much success. When they had finished, Jebs headed for Sam's bookshelves, poring over titles.
"I see you bought a few home mechanical and repair techs," he said to the giant. "Do you reckon there's anything in them about water wheels?"
"Afraid not, Jebs," said Sam, shaking his big head. "As I said this morning, I hadn't even thought about water power. Anyway, I run mostly to books about nature study and standard fiction."
"I see that," said Jebs, eyeing a row of books. "You've got some of Ernest Thompson Seton's works. I always liked them. Maybe what we'd better do is talk to somebody who understands about the principles of water power mechanics." "I know just the man," said Driscoll, joining them. "Sam knows him, too. Mr. Lyman Hager in Wagram. He's a welder and metal worker. Randy, Jebs, do you want to go over there this afternoon?"
"Let's stay here, Jebs," said Randy. "We've been spending too much time in civilization lately."
"Well, then Sam and I will drive over in the new Jeep," decided Driscoll. "Sam understands enough about the wheel rig to explain it to Mr. Hager."
"I'm with you, Driscoll," said Sam. "Jebs, let me have those sketches you made. Now don't you and Randy murder yourselves working. Why not wander around and explore your old stamping grounds?"
They all went outdoors. Willie Dubbin slouched away to resume his plowing. Sam and Driscoll headed for the Jeep.
"Any trails leading anywhere?"
called Jebs after them.
"There's one at the back of the old place," Sam told him. "The Indians use it to visit that lonely blind man I told you about, Mr. Tasman."
He hoisted his bulk into the rear of the Jeep, dwarfing its proportions. Driscoll started the motor and drove away with his big partner.
"That lonely blind man," Jebs repeated Sam's words. "Randy, what say we go have a peek at him?"
"Why not?" said Randy at once. "Sam said last night that he lives about a mile away. I'd like to stretch my legs and shake down that dinner before I start kneeling on the roof again."
"Suits me."
They skirted the edge of the cornfield, moved around the filled-in foundation hole of the raised manor house, and beyond it came to the trail of which the giant had told them. It was no more than the slight indication of a path, roving here and there among the trees on no apparent course, but not hard to follow when once found. The boys trudged past and under loblolly and longleaf pines, past dark-skinned gum trees and tall tulip trees. As they trudged, they talked, rehearsing the events of the recent night and morning. At last Randy, who was in the lead, stopped and held up his hand for a halt.
"There's a clearing just ahead,"
he said, dropping his voice. They could see into one of those naturally treeless spaces in a forest, and against a close-grown clump of jack-oaks and small pines on the far side, they could make out a building. It was a small cabin, little more than a shack, made of stout whipsawed slabs. Building paper covered its shed-type roof. Its size, it measured perhaps 12 feet by 15 feet, and in the side visible across the clearing the boys saw a half-open door of cleated planks and a single small window, its sash raised, and a piece of dark cloth hanging inside like a curtain. There was no garden, no outbuilding, no sign of life or motion except—
"He's bound to be at home," said Jebs. "I see smoke coming out of the chimney."
"Who's there?" someone challenged them. The voice came from inside the half-open door. It was a strong, ringing voice, but with a flat quality to its accent. Neither Jebs nor Randy replied. Something of mystery and inhospitality seemed to hang about the clearing, the cabin, and the unseen dweller. After a moment, the door pulled all the way inward. Then a man appeared on the sill. He was under medium height and of slender build, and he wore an old faded khaki shirt and trousers. In one hand he held a knotty-looking cane, the point of which he thrust gropingly before him. As he stepped into the open, he raised his face. It was a gaunt, line-bracketed face with curly gray hair above it. It looked pale, and its expression was of a strained attention. The eyes were wide open, and stared emptily.
"Who's there?" the man repeated. "I can't see. I'm blind." "Speak up, whoever you are. State your business, if you've got any, and then go away. I don't like visitors."
End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4. The Dogs Return. There was another moment of silence. The blind man stood outside his crude door, leaning lightly on the knotty cane. He craned his lean, tense face forward on his slim neck. Then he moved toward the boys. His feet shuffled as though finding their own way, but they were sure and even nimble. The cane lifted a little, and Randy and Jebs saw that it was a stout-looking piece of wood and that the hand in which it rested was a sinewy one. "Are you Mr. Hobart Tasman?" ventured Randy. Again the blind man stood still, his vacant eyes turned toward Randy.
"If you know my name, you know that I'm blind and want to be left alone," said Hobart Tasman. "What are you doing here? You sound young, like a boy still in your teens. Haven't you anything better to do with your time than come poking around where you're not wanted? I live out here to keep away from people like you."
"My name's Randy Hunter, and I have a friend with me," said Randy. "He's Jebs Markham."
"Hey there, Mr. Tasman,"
said Jebs diffidently.
"We don't want to meddle with your business,"
went on Randy. "We're visiting some friends, Driscoll Jordan and Sam Cohill, and we only thought—"
"Driscoll Jordan and Sam Cohill,"
repeated Hobart Tasman coldly.
"When Sam Cohill speaks, his voice comes from nearly a yard above my head. I've heard that he's a monster. He tramped over here once, and I could hear his great big feet shaking the ground. Well, I told him to stay away. I don't care for giants."
Randy looked at Hobart Tasman. The blind man was small, and Randy knew that sometimes small men resented big ones.
"Sam can't help being oversized," argued Randy. "He's really a gentlemanly kind of person. As I started to say, we came over here because he worries about you, all alone as you are, and—"
Randy broke off embarrassed.
"Go on, finish it,"
said Hobart Tasman harshly, gripping his cane.
"I'm not afraid to be reminded that I can't see."
"We'll get out if you want us to, Mr. Tasman," said Jebs. "We just wanted to find out if we could help in any way, that's all."
Tasman relaxed a trifle.
"You sound like well-brought-up young fellows," he said more gently. "If I were you, I'd go back and help that friend of yours, Cohill. Probably he needs help."
The voice turned harsh again.
"Probably he needs to be taught civilized ways. Does he even know how to read and write?"
Randy and Jebs had turned to go, but Jebs, nettled at the slur on Sam, paused and spoke over his shoulder.
"You're figuring Sam all wrong," he said hotly. "He's as civilized pound for pound as anybody in North Carolina. He doesn't need to learn how to read. He reads plenty. He's got about 500 books on his shelves."
"Books?"
echoed Hobart Tasman so quickly that both boys turned to look at him again.
"What kind of books?"
"Why," said Randy, "I was looking at his shelf last night. He has novels and things like the poems of Milton and Longfellow." "And natural history books," added Jebs. "A couple of reference books and stories by Ernest Thompson Seton, and some—"
"Ernest Thompson Seton,"
repeated Tasman more sharply than before.
"What books by Seton?"
Let's see," said Jebs. "There was the biography of a grizzly, and there was Wild Animal Ways, and, wait a minute, Lives of the Hunted. That's one I always liked."
For the first time the slender, hard-knit form stood easy, and a smile touched the gaunt face.
"You like it?"
said Tasman softly.
"Lives of the Hunted, eh? I never read it."
"Maybe you'd like to borrow it,"
said Jebs impulsively, then fell awkwardly silent, feeling he had said the wrong thing. But Tasman only shook his gray head slowly and sadly.
"You know I couldn't read it."
"Listen," offered Jebs, eager to make amends. "Maybe somebody could read it to you. Maybe I could."
"Would you?"
said the blind man, and moved a step forward. He looked and sounded hungry.
"Would you, boy?"
"We'd both be glad to," Randy assured him. "As a matter of fact, I don't think I ever read Lives of the Hunted either, so you and I would both be getting that book for the first time."
Tasman leaned both hands on his cane.
"I'm sorry if I was hasty a moment ago," he said. "I've always been interested in natural history and outdoor life. I used to study it until I went blind. Well, all right, I accept your offer. Next time you come this way, you might bring that book."
"We'll borrow it from Sam," promised Jebs, "and bring it over the next time we come."
"Good day, then, both of you. What were your names now? Randy Hunter and Jeb Markham?"
"It's Jebs, not Jeb," said the owner of that name. "I was baptized James Ewell Brown Stewart Markham, and folks kind of hammer it down to Jebs.
I see. Jebs Markham. Good day to you."
Thus dismissing them with a touch of his earlier cool reserve, Hobart Tasman started back toward his cabin door. Again his feet seemed to slide along, feeling their way. His stick, questing ahead, touched the door sill. He put his free hand on the jamb, lifted his foot, and stepped inside. Randy and Jebs headed back toward New Chimney Pot.
"Well, that was a genuine corn-fed brush-off," commented Jebs. "For 2 cents, I would never go near him again."
"I won't offer you 2 cents," replied Randy, "because I'm going back. Both of us will go back, carrying the book with us. He needs company. I'll bet he's interesting once he starts to talk. He said that he studied natural history."
"And why doesn't he act more natural?" demanded Jebs. "Maybe that's acting natural for a hermit, though. Sam Cohill was funny when we first met up with him."
"Sam understands a fellow like Mr. Tasman," said Randy. "Sam had sympathy for him. When he saw that man wanted to be let alone, Sam did just that. Sam knows what it's like to want no company but your own." Halfway along the home trail, Rebel met them. The white dog did not bound or bark, but showed plainly that he recognized the two boys as guests at his home, and was ready to offer them friendly courtesy. Returning to the yard of New Chimney Pot House, the two consulted. "What'll we do while the jeep's coming back?" asked Randy. "Work at the dam or on the shingles?"
"Well, the shingles are probably worse needed," said Jebs. "Look at the clouds boiling up above those trees to the northwest. Maybe it won't rain tonight, but when it does, we'd better have our roof on."
Thus agreed, they heaved more bundles of shingles up the ladder and began to nail down new courses. Hours passed at this work. Through the yard below them moved the mule wagon, with Willie Dubbin heading back to the Martin farm.
"Take care of them wild dogs don't tree you all up there," he called to him. "Though I wouldn't swear, but what them dogs might not know how to climb. Maybe even fly."
The wagon rolled on, and the rest of his words were lost.
"Hear that?" said Jebs. "About dogs flying? It gives me the creeps."
"Don't get believing Willie Dubbin's superstitions," cautioned Randy.
"I'm trying hard not to,"
said Jebs, putting nails in his mouth. A large expanse of the tar paper slope was shingled when the noise of an engine heralded the jeep's return. Randy and Jebs scrambled down to greet Sam and Driscoll.
"Look what we brought back,"
said Driscoll as Sam hoisted out a heavy-looking piece of machinery.
"That Mr. Lyman Hager understands any kind of an idea and builds any gadget to order while you wait. Fancy, huh?"
"Pretty fancy, though I don't see how it works," confessed Randy. The device of which Driscoll and Sam looked so proud was a straight metal axle, nearly 5 feet long, with a hub at each end, from which spokes had apparently been chopped or broken. At first glance it seemed that these hubs had once held two wheels of unequal sizes, both of them now crowded in upon the axle so as to rest about a foot inward from the hubs on either side. One wheel was a solid metal pulley some 15 inches in diameter, and the other apparently an old disc wheel from a junked automobile, innocent of tire.
"Your Mr. Hager must be a genius," commented Jebs. "It'll take another genius to know how that will work."
"Oh, it works," said Sam. "This is a straight axle from the wreck of a specially made wagon. Each of these hubs is put on with bearings to allow a fast, easy turn. Mr. Hager clamped and coupled the wheel and the pulley both fast to the axle. We can assemble the wooden framework of a water wheel to the big wheel, and when the stream over the dam sets its turning around, the pulley turns at the same speed. A belt connects it to the power plant, and there you are."
"I get it now,"
cried Jebs, his mystification changing to enthusiasm as he examined the arrangement.
"We can set the hubs in solid supports, and they'll stand still while the axle turns with the water wheel and the pulley. And look at the tags of angle iron Mr. Hager screwed on for our wooden work to bolt on to," added Driscoll, pointing. "Well, you two seem to have shingled away hard while we were gone." "We mightn't have done a right much more if we hadn't gone calling on your Mr. Hobart Tasman," said Jebs. "Did you do that?" said Driscoll. "I'll bet he ordered you away from his lair."
"You'd win that bet, but he changed his mind when we offered to read to him out of one of Sam's books," Randy told him. "Sam, will you let me take Lives of the Hunted over to him tomorrow?"
"Certainly. Now where do we start in next? Jebs, if you want to get back at the dam, I'm with you there. Driscoll's yearning to nail on some more shingles."
Work continued until near sundown, when the four assembled in the yard once more. Sam stooped inside the tool shed. Now, before we settle in for the night, he said as he turned back with a sheaf of traps dangling from his big hand, I'm going to set these. I used to trap mink and muskrat and raccoon with them. Maybe they won't hold a very big wild dog if they snap on him, but they'll pinch his toe. Since that pack drifted in pretty close last night, let's prepare for another visit. At the main approaches to sty, calf shed, and chicken run, they set traps, fastening them to roots of trees or to pegs driven firmly into the ground.
I'll feed the calves and the chickens, offered Driscoll. Jebs, let Sam show you and Randy about getting some corn to the pigs, then we'll eat.
Supper was good and plentiful as breakfast and dinner had been, but it was not quite so cheerful. Finally, Driscoll paused in the act of giving a pork chop to Rebel and looked at Randy.
Why the strong, silent pose? He asked. You haven't spoken for a quarter of an hour, and neither has Jebs. I'm usually a steady talker, but I keep remembering Willie Dubbin and his dog notions, said Jebs. They sound silly in the daytime, but when the sun goes down... And I'm thinking about that blind man, Mr. Tasman, put in Randy. I remember how sharp his ears were. He could hear our movements and voices, and he knew right away how old we were, and made fairly good guesses about our way of thinking and doing. Blind folks are apt to hear better than people with good eyes. I see what you're getting at, said Jebs. He ought to be able to hear those wild dogs at night, but he didn't seem to worry about them. He never even mentioned wild dogs.
He doesn't have any pigs or chickens to attract him, suggested Sam. Maybe they leave him alone.
But Mr. Martin said they might be dangerous to people, reminded Jebs. What if they didn't find any pigs or chickens, but did find someone who was too blind to run or fight?
Rebel lifted his head from his plate of scraps and growled, deeply and softly. From out in the darkening woods rose a long-drawn, trembling cry to salute the moon.
That's the dog they call Bugler, muttered Jebs.
Yes, it's getting dark, said Sam Cohill. The wild dogs are coming back. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5. Attack and Defense. The dishes washed and stacked, everyone went to the front room. The night seemed chilly for June. Driscoll quickly kindled a fire of small chips and sticks on the big hearth. Sam Cohill lighted the lamp and sat down in his massive chair. Wild dogs seem fantastic, he said, his great fingers stroking his pointed beard. If any animal seems tame, it's a wild dog. Yet all dogs were wild once. Every dog you see is descended from a wild ancestor.
Can't we drop the subject? Jebs almost groaned. It's like Randy says, I'm getting to be like Willie Dubbin.
If we could forget it, I'd be glad to drop it, replied Sam. But even if we don't talk about wild dogs, we'll have them in our thoughts.
I agree, said Randy. And what Sam says is true. Probably men have had dogs ever since the Stone Age. But in the days before the first dog was tamed, probably they sat around a fire the way we're sitting now. And in the night they could hear... He broke off. Bugler's quavering cry rang again. It sounded nearer. Rebel sat up and growled as before. They could hear that, finished Randy, trying to keep his voice steady. Rebel rose from beside the hearth. He stood stiff-legged and his cropped ears strained forward. His stubby tail cocked itself like a trigger. Once more he rumbled deeply in his throat. Driscoll, too, got to his feet. I have a hunch we're going to have visitors, he said softly. That's the way Rebel acted last night when the wild dog zeroed in on you two out in the front yard.
Rising swiftly for his great bulk, Sam Cohill cupped a tremendous hand around the lamp chimney and blew into it. The flame went out. Darkness fell, so instantly that it was like diving into a heap of coal. Only a tiny red glow remained on the hearth, where the fire had died almost away. Everyone stood silent, the three boys, their upstanding friend, and the bull-terrier. After a moment, Rebel crooned his low warning growl, and they heard his claws rattle on the floorboards. He was moving stealthily toward the kitchen.
Whatever it is coming toward the backyard, muttered Driscoll tensely.
Wait another second or so, and your eyes will get used to the dark, advised Sam.
I can see a little bit already,
said Jebs. "All right, let's head for the kitchen," Sam directed. They followed his towering back, a darker silhouette in the dusky room. Driscoll paused by the fireplace long enough to snatch down his machete and clear it from its sheath. In the kitchen, Sam groped hurriedly in a corner and passed something to Randy. "That's a hickory pole I whittled out to make a mop from," he said. "Maybe it'll come in useful. Here, Jebs, this is a spare axe handle. How do you feel? Worried?"
"Excited," said Jebs, "but not worried."
Rebel scratched at the door. He was growling all the time in a tone of soft menace. Driscoll was with them now, machete in hand. "Now," said Sam, "I'm going to open the door. I'll stop just outside by the woodpile. I know just the big chunk I want to get my own hand on. It'll take me long enough to stoop and reach out, then I'll be with you. Go on and charge past me. Follow Rebel when he charges for whatever we got out there."
"Roger," said
Jebs. "Then here we go," said Sam. He pulled open the door and sprang out. Rebel fairly sailed into the night, a flying white blob like a newspaper blown before a gale. Randy, swift and ready, followed him at a dead run. Jebs and Driscoll came galloping behind, straight for the sheds where the animals were kept. Rebel led the rush. The terrier reached his objective, yards in advance of even the swift-racing Randy. As on the previous night, there sounded a scuffling impact of bodies, a click as of teeth coming together, and an agonized canine howl. Then Randy had caught up. He had come almost against the stockade around the pig pen, just as the moon rose into an open space among the heavy clouds. By its light he saw that one of the tall perpendicular slabs was down, and that, beside it, Rebel had encountered and seized a floundering shape, darker than himself. Another dog, faintly outlined, rushed for Rebel's flank, and Randy struck at this rusher with the long, tough hickory stick. It found its mark solidly, and a sharp cry of angry pain answered. But the dog he had struck did not run. It wheeled clear of another blow, and he saw its teeth gleam as it faced him.
"Yah-hee!"
rang a shrill, fierce Rebel yell at Randy's elbow. Driscoll was beside him. His machete made a whipping sound in the night, as he made play with it like a saber. Randy could hear the heavy scramble of Sam Cohill, and from the corner of his eye saw that Rebel's opponent had pulled loose from the terrier's hold and was fleeing. The dog before him and Driscoll pivoted nimbly and also dashed away. Others were retreating here and there among the trees.
"Stay here, Rebel,"
called Driscoll sharply, and Rebel abandoned the pursuit at once.
"Don't want my dog messed up with a whole regiment of them," said Driscoll. "Look, they're really pulling foot." "It's an organized withdrawal," wheezed Jebs, catching up. Strategic retreat, like an army."
Sam Cohill, too, lumbered into position beside them. A length of rough wood, big as a fence post, flourished over his head. "Look over there by the garden," he yelled. "We caught one of them in a trap." Hurrying forward all together, they scrambled and shoved through an intervening clump of trees. The moon was beginning to slide behind the clouds again, but there was light to see what Sam, from his greater height, had already made out. A big gaunt dog of a darkness that probably would be brown by day danced and tugged as though at a tether. Another dog that looked light with dark spots crouched beside him. "That must be Bugler," cried Randy, again darting ahead of his slower-footed friends.
"Let's get 'em both,"
yelled Driscoll behind him.
"Yah-hee! Come on, Rebel."
But as Randy rushed close, the dark dog seemed to leap free from whatever held it. It sped off into the woods. Even as Randy reached the other dog, the spotted one, it came out of its crouch and seemed to lift itself. It rose upright in the dimness. Its forelimbs flung themselves out like arms. As it pulled its head backward to face Randy, he had a blood-freezing impression of eyes that shone in the night like pale fire. And Rebel, who had caught up with Randy, fell violently back on his haunches, as though putting on brakes. "Look out!" Randy fairly screamed. That isn't a dog." At his words, the spotted shape fairly spun itself around and dashed after the retreating pack. It was gone among the trees beyond the garden. To Randy it seemed to lope on 2 legs instead of 4. He stood still, and the others came up around him, breathing heavily. Sam Cohill took a long, powerful stride as though to give chase. His big bearded face shoved forward, staring. Clouds had covered the moon again. They could see almost nothing.
"Wait, Rebel,"
cautioned Driscoll shakily as the bull terrier gathered himself for another rush.
Don't, don't go after that thing. What were you saying, Randy?
I said it wasn't a dog, repeated Randy. It got up and ran on two legs like a man. Sam Cohill, just ahead of him, hoisted his big square shoulders, then stooped a little. Well, they ran away, said the giant slowly. They're out of here for the night, I think. We can't catch them now. He faced about. Randy, what's the matter? You still act as if you'd seen a ghost. If it only was a ghost, quavered Randy.
Now it's you that's getting to believe like Willie Dubbin. It was your imagination, urged Driscoll. Maybe you saw the dog lift itself up to jump over something.
Randy did not argue. He hoped that Driscoll was right, that he had only imagined the weird change from beast form to man form. Driscoll moved to one side and stooped above something. Jebbs and Randy joined him to look. The jaws of the trap were clamped shut. And another was set here where we saw that dog caught, called Sam Cohill. He was in it, but he got free.
The spotted one helped him escape, spoke up Randy. Doesn't that sound like more than dog sense? You're quoting Willie Dubbin again, said Jebbs. And look at where a slab was pulled loose from the pig pen, went on Randy, walking toward it. That was another smart try. Sam came and propped the slab back in place. Head for the house, somebody, and get me a hammer. I'll nail it back in place. We can leave Rebel out to keep tab for a while. Meanwhile, we ought to let the world know about what's happening here. I'll drive over to Martin's and telephone to the sheriff, said Driscoll. And, by the way, you won't mind if I stay over there all night, will you? I think you were silly if you didn't, Jebbs proclaimed. It isn't any treat coming back here after dark with wild dogs howling and sneaking around. Come with me, Jebbs, invited Driscoll. Mr. Martin's boy, Lee Martin, has an electric railroad, and you're interested in things like that. I sure enough am, said Jebbs. But I think I'll stick here with Randy. It's up to me to talk Randy out of this crazy notion he has about a dog going two-legged on him. He glanced toward his friend. It was just your imagination, wasn't it, Randy? I certainly hope so, Randy confessed honestly. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6 Hobart Tasman Again. There were no more alarms during the night. Randy was surprised next morning to find that he had slept soundly. He and Jebbs ate breakfast with Sam Cohill, and as they went out into the yard they saw that Willie Dubbin had not come. I sort of reckoned we wouldn't see much of Willie today, observed Jebbs. I can see it now. Driscoll showing up there to use the phone and Willie listening to what went on out here last night. He'd find a dozen things he'd better do on Mr. Martin's place instead of here. Probably it was a good thing Randy didn't go over there with his story, grinned Sam. If Willie heard that tale, he'd be halfway to New York by now. Well, we don't need him today. I kind of wish I'd gone over with Driscoll, said Jebbs. If the Martin kid has a real electric train set up, I want to have a look at it. That's not as much a kid stuff as you might think. I've heard of grown men following it for a hobby. Want me to help you with the shingling, Randy? There's only a little of it left to do, said Randy. You better stick to your water wheel business with Sam. He swarmed up the ladder, hammer in hand, then Sam handed up a supply of his hand-split shingles. The rest of the shingling job did not take too long. Randy shingled both slopes up to the ridge. Then he sorted out a number of shingles all about 6 inches wide and marked lines on the last courses about 5 inches from the center line of the ridge. The first shingle nailed on in the final course, he cut back square at the ridge line with a hatchet, and then cut back the shingle on the opposite side so as to overlap slightly. The next 2 shingles he nailed on in reverse order. At mid-morning, Jebbs climbed up for a brief look at Randy's work. "Looks fancy," he said. "This way there won't be more than 6 continuous inches of crack to let rain trickle in," Randy explained. "They call this a Boston ridge." "Maybe it's a Boston stunt, but it's okay down here in the South, too," approved Jebbs, departing. "Come down when you're through and see how Sam and I are making out."
Driving the last nail, Randy descended and made his way to the stream. Jebs and the giant had completed their dam. The space between the logs and the lines of upright stakes had been solidly filled in with earth and stones, well tamped down with a square sawed log in Sam's powerful hands. Behind this sturdy structure, the water was collecting and slowly rising. At the top, the dam measured 16 feet or so, and at one point was whittled out to make a spillway. Opposite this, Jebs and Sam were installing a sort of rough trough made of thick planks nailed together.
"That's our flume," explained Jebs. "It's set lower than the level of the spillway, and when there's more water than it can accommodate, the spillway will take care of it. But if the water drops down, it'll all come to the flume. We want a good stream here to turn our wheel."
Randy examined the wheel with admiration. Sam and Jebs had made a complicated sheath-like structure of well-nailed planks, which was strongly bolted to the fastenings their friend the metal worker had provided on the wheel. Completed, it took the form of a double disc about as large as a wheel of the Jeep, and around its rim they had set a series of compartments, opening outward and sloping inward to tapered bottoms. A thick coating of fresh drab paint covered the whole affair. "Those are our buckets," said Sam, indicating the compartments. "The water shoots into them, and its weight carries each bucket down and brings another into the range of the stream. That flume's solidly in place now, Jebs. Help me with the final job." He picked up the whole assembly of wheel, pulley, and axle. It was of considerable weight, but Sam's mighty arms lifted the thing easily and lowered it across the stream, slowly fitting it into position. Jebs stood by to guide one hub, then the other into deep, broad notches in a pair of stout posts that had been driven into the channel, straight against the banks. The wheel finally came to rest immediately below the lower end of the flume, and Sam shoved powerfully upon each hub in turn to wedge it into place. Then he and Jebs began to pound in spikes to make the fastening solid.
"We want those hubs to hold as if they'd grown into the posts," Jeb told Randy. "How'd you like the posts? Sam cut a couple of persimmon tree chunks for 'em. That kind of wood takes a right long time to go to pieces in damp ground."
"And this afternoon we'll build a sort of doghouse for the power plant to live in," added Sam. "A belt runs from the pulley to the plant, and as long as water runs, so will electricity."
"Won't you have to wait a while for the water to build up to where it'll be of any help?" asked Randy, peering behind the dam.
"No, our water is on the way," and Sam's great forefinger pointed to the fattening clouds overhead. "Tonight, as I judge, we'll get a lively little rain. By tomorrow we can get ready for electrification."
Randy grinned.
"Wouldn't it have been simpler just to hitch it to a gasoline engine?" "Sure enough," admitted Jebs, "but not as cheap, and nowhere near as much fun to make."
Seizing a bucket and a brush, Jebs began to paint the flume. Randy returned to the house, picking up broken bits of shingle around the sides. Both his own work and the watching of Jebs and Sam's imaginative project had calmed him down after the nerve-troubling adventure of the previous night. But disturbing thoughts came back as he stacked the trash away and headed for the house to wash up for dinner. Again he remembered his fleeting glimpse of what had looked like a two-legged spotted thing. Only a glimpse, a brief one, and in the dark. But he could not forget it. Jebs had cried out that the creature must be Bugler. Hadn't Mr. Martin told them that Bugler was a big dog with dark spots on light coarse hair? And Bugler was the leader of the prowling pack, or seemed to be. The wild dogs were the subject of discussion at noon over plates of rice and stewed beef. "They retreated on signal," remembered Randy, buttering a slice of cornbread. "It was just the way Jeb said, like night maneuvers in the army."
"And those sprung traps," added Jebs.
"Well, foxes spring traps sometimes," Sam told them. "Don't underestimate the minds of animals. But just supposing a human being was out there with the dogs, just supposing a man had a reason to lead them against us, who would it be?"
"I haven't the faintest idea," said Randy. "And I'm not right purely certain I want to find out," Jebs elaborated.
"If Randy thinks a human being was there," insisted Sam, "he ought to make a guess as to who the human being was."
Randy ate several forkfuls of beef and rice. "Well, gentlemen," he said at last, "maybe it's Willie Dubbin. Maybe he's pretending to be superstitious to cover up his trail."
"Not Willie Dubbin," objected Jeb scornfully. He means it when he says he believes that stuff. He wouldn't dare come within a country mile of those dogs."
"What about Mr. James Martin?" asked Randy. "He seems to know a lot about the wild dogs."
"Well, that doesn't make sense," said Sam. "Anyway, you boys talked to him night before last, and then came on here to run right into the dogs. He couldn't have reached here before you."
"Don't overlook Hobart Tasman," said Randy.
"Tasman's as blind as a bat," objected Sam. "Blinder because bats aren't really blind. I doubt if he can tell the difference between light and dark."
"But he is a right funny acting scudder," said Jebs thoughtfully. "Out in the woods by himself."
"Let's try to check up when we go over to read to him," suggested Randy. "Who else?"
"Rebel seems to have a nomination," observed Sam as the terrier lifted his head from his dish and growled crooningly toward the front of the house.
Then a voice hailed them from outside. They went to the front door to find a parked car in the yard and a sturdy man getting out.
"I'm Deputy Sheriff Weaver," he announced. "I reckon there's nobody else in these parts as big as you, mister, so you must be Sam Cohill." "That's right," said Sam. "Did Driscoll Jordan get in touch with you?"
"He telephoned the sheriff's office last night and stayed at Jimmy Martin's to meet me and tell me how to get here. He'll be along after he picks up something he's waiting for."
"The ice," said Sam. "Well, I'll tell you our problem."
Deputy Sheriff Weaver sat on the doorstep and listened to Sam's story. Sam did not mention Randy's fancy of a dog walking on two legs, nor did Randy volunteer anything about it. Finally, the deputy shrugged and frowned.
"It'd be right hard to put a stop to those hounds without we could be sure of the right ones," he said. "The law would have to be certain sure it was cracking down only on wild dogs and not tame ones." He gazed at Rebel. "Does this big fellow of yours run out at night?"
"Only now and then when we put him out," replied Sam.
"You see how I'm fixed, folks. You can be sure enough to make yourself a sight of trouble if you bother dogs belonging to people."
"What you say is true," agreed Sam. "But something has to be done. We had to chase that pack out of our yard 2 nights running. Another night, and they may start killing off our pigs and calves."
"I came here organized to do something," said Deputy Weaver.
Rising, he reached into his hip pocket and produced a folded paper.
"Here, Mr. Cohill," he said. "This is for you."
"For me?"
Slowly, Sam took the paper in his big hand.
"What is it? A summons?" "No, it's a commission from the sheriff's office of Scotland County. My boss knows all about you over in Laurenburg. He's got a right much of respect for you, so he's going to make you a special deputy."
"Special deputy?"
echoed Sam, unfolding the paper.
"Why?" "Read that commission. It gives you authority to make an investigation and figure out some way to stop this wild dog nuisance," explained the deputy. "You're here on the scene. You can do this thing and help us and help yourself too. See?"
When the deputy had driven away again, Randy went into the front room and took from the bookshelf Sam's copy of Lives of the Hunted. He and Jebs headed away for the trail to Hobart Tasman's house. "Hang back and let me talk to him alone," whispered Randy to Jebs as they approached the clearing. "Maybe I can read to him while you sort of investigate around. Do some detective work."
"It's a deal,"
whispered Jebs back, and Randy stepped alone into the clearing. "Mr. Tasman," he called. The slim figure of the hermit came slowly into sight at the doorway.
"Is that Randy Hunter?"
he called back. "Yes, sir. I brought that book we was talking about." Randy approached. "You said I could bring it and read to you."
"All right, come ahead,"
granted Tasman.
"Tell your friend he can come along too."
Randy glanced back. Jebs followed him slowly toward the cabin, his square face crestfallen. As they came closer to Tasman, they saw a slight smile at the corners of his thin mouth.
"I can hear a whisper a mile off,"
said Tasman, with something of quiet triumph.
"When you lose your sight, your hearing sharpens up. You said something to somebody, and somebody whispered back, so I knew there were 2 of you, the same 2 boys who were here yesterday. Well, are you enjoying your stay?"
"We're a little bothered by wild dogs, Mr. Tasman," said Jebs.
"You are?"
Tasman looked interested.
"Sam Cohill mumbled something about them once."
"What's more," pursued Jebs, "Randy here thought for a while that he saw one of the dogs hop up and walk on its hind legs."
"On its hind legs,"
repeated Tasman slowly.
Let's hear about that.
While Jebs described the previous night's excitements, Randy looked sharply into Tasman's fixed, staring eyes. Their pupils looked not black, but a pearly gray. Randy knew what cataracts were and how they could blind a man. But was Tasman telling the truth about depending on his ears alone? Might he not be concealing some power to see, pretending to be blind for reasons of his own?
I would think, said Tasman when Jebs had finished, that your friend Randy is a little too full of stories about werewolves.
Werewolves? Said Randy. I've heard something about them and seen some of those crazy horror movies, but, well, I don't believe in them, that's for sure.
Lots of people do believe in them,
said Tasman quietly.
It's an old superstition. It must go back to the beginning of time, and it's known in every country of the globe. You can read about werewolves in old Greek and Roman writings, and just about the time America was first being colonized, there were some accusations and trials in Europe.
You mean folks stood trial for turning into wolves? Demanded Jebs incredulously. With judges and juries and prosecuting attorneys and all? What kind of evidence did they have against them?
At the time, the evidence was considered pretty conclusive, Tasman said rather grimly. You can find it in a book about werewolves written by Montague Summers. I read it years ago. One case the book described was about Gilles Garnier, a Frenchman. He was convicted in 1573, as I remember. There were plenty of neighbors to say he turned into a wolf, and finally he confessed. They executed him. There was another case about a man with almost the same name, Jean Grenier. He confessed too. They gave him life imprisonment.
But that's a fairy tale, protested Randy. You're talking about things happening in the 1500s. Around that time, you had
William Shakespeare writing his plays, interrupted Tasman smoothly. You had Galileo proving that the earth moved around the sun, and Richard Grenville founding a colony down here on the California coast. The Lost Colony they tell about in a pageant each summer. The 1500s produced some of the greatest scientists and artists and heroes in history.
And some of the greatest werewolves, suggested Jebs.
Well, Montague Summers' book contains the records. The one I liked best was a German werewolf called Peter Stumpf. There was a long list of signed witnesses who swore they'd seen him change from a beast into a man.
Willie Dubbin ought to be listening to this, said Jebs. He'd get chills and fever enough for a whole county. Say, Mr. Tasman, you remember that book right clearly.
Well, that's another thing about being blind, Tasman said. You remember the books you read when you could see. You mull them over and over in your memory. But speaking of books, you said you'd brought Lives of the Hunted?
Randy was standing almost close enough to touch Tasman. He decided to find out once and for all if Tasman's blindness was complete.
Yes, sir, he said.
Here it is. Then he thrust the book swiftly and directly at Tasman, almost into the gaunt face. Randy's movement was almost violently sudden, and the book came within 3 inches of striking Tasman's nose. But Tasman's fixed eyes did not shift or blink. Plainly he could not see, or he would have flinched involuntarily away.
Thanks for bringing it, said Tasman. All right, what's the first story in it?
Randy looked at the table of contents. It's called Crag the Kootenai Ram, he said. It's about a mountain sheep, I guess.
Mountain sheep, repeated Tasman.
I used to like to be in the mountains. Wait, please. He turned and shuffled back into the house. After a moment he returned, carrying an old kitchen chair in each hand. Sit down, you two, he invited. Start reading while I work in here. Randy, watching him return through the open door into the half-gloomy interior, saw Tasman move confidently across the floor, put out a hand, and find the back of a chair. The blind man sat down before a sort of workbench and dipped his hand into a metal pan. Randy began to read Ernest Thompson Seton's absorbing story of the heroic ram of the Rocky Mountains. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. Tasman's Story. Listening to the adventures of Crag, Tasman took from his pan a lump of clay, gray and dripping wet. He worked it furiously in his hands, dipped it into the water several times, and finally brought it to the soft, workable consistency he wanted. Then he slapped it down at the very center of his bench, on a round wooden platform that was fixed there like a primitive plate or dish. His feet reached for a treadle like that of a sewing machine set on a pivot under the bench. He worked the treadle faster and faster, and the platform began to turn swiftly. While it spun around, Tasman's hands made themselves busy with the clay. Randy glanced up between paragraphs, watching briefly. Jebs, quiet in his own chair, became absorbed in Tasman's work. Tasman kept dipping one hand into the pan for palmfuls of water to sprinkle on the clay, while the fingers of the other quested along the lump's outer surface. Those fingers acted like the blade of a lathe against a turning block of wood. The clay gradually changed shape to a thick bun-like disc, still spinning around and around. Then Tasman shifted his hand carefully toward the center, and the boys could see the shape change again as it revolved. The inside dipped down, and the outer rim rose until it resembled a heavy saucer. Tasman's thumb came into play, and as the saucer continued to turn, it grew narrower and higher, becoming a bowl, a cup. It assumed the shape of a large, thick-walled drinking tumbler, while Tasman's foot kept the treadle going and the horizontal potter's wheel turning. And he did all this almost as though he were not thinking about it at all. His ears listened eagerly to the tale of a wild lamb that grew, its horns appearing and curving nobly out, its little body growing into a big body. While Randy sketched the growth of a lamb into a ram, Tasman's skillful fingers seemed to spin the lump of clay into a gracefully curved and flaring vase. But it was not to finish as a vase. At length Tasman stopped his treading foot. As the vase stood still, he explored its wet plastic lip with his fingers. Then he deftly pinched it at one point into a pitcher mouth. Taking another bit of clay from the pan, he rolled it between his palms into a little rod, and bent this to join on as a handle above and below. Randy paused in his reading, and both he and Jebs looked on in admiring wonder.
"I never saw the beat of that before," confessed Jebs.
Tasman's slight brief smile flashed at them.
"It takes a little doing," he said. "I learned pottery making when I was years younger than you two. My whole family makes pottery, what the educated folks call ceramics, up in the western part of North Carolina."
Carefully he lifted the pitcher from the wheel and set it aside to dry.
"Are you tired of reading?" he suggested.
"No," said Randy. "I'll catch my breath and go ahead." Again he took up the story of Crag. While he read of the brave ram's leadership of his mountain flock and the half-crazy pursuit of Crag by a hunter who swore to collect that majestically horned head, Tasman prepared another lump of clay. He fashioned a second pitcher, and then a third, while Randy continued the story to its end, with both Crag and his human destroyer going down to death. All three were fascinated by the narrative, and when it was finished, Tasman set his last pitcher to dry with the others.
"That's not the sweetest story ever told, boys," he observed. "But that's the way of life. When folks tell you that nature is always kind, they're being too short and simple. Nature can be rough, too."
"I reckon I'll go along with that, Mr. Tasman," said Jebs. "Nature raises up whole nations of animals, and nature destroys them again, too. Maybe when a hunter kills an animal right quick and painless, he could be saving it from a worse death."
"Yes," said Tasman, pushing back his chair. "Any animal. One as strong and smart and brave as that Crag ram your friend was reading about may live long enough to get old. When that happens, he's in a fix. He can die pretty miserably if he's old or crippled or blind."
He shut his mouth with an audible snap of his teeth. Then he smiled as though it took an effort to do so.
"I think I owe you kids an explanation," he went on. "That mountain life stuff in the story carried me back in my own thoughts. I used to live in the mountains, just like I told you."
"The North Carolina mountains?"
prompted Jebs.
"Right. I reckon there's been a Tasman in the North Carolina mountains since way back to the first settlers. A Tasman fought at Kings Mountain in the Revolution. There was a Tasman in Congress about the time of Andrew Jackson. My grandfather was in the 32nd North Carolina Infantry that nearly got wiped out on the second day at Gettysburg. And long before I was born, Tasmans made pottery, plain and fancy. For quite a spell of years, my folks did right well at pottery making, 'cause they got to selling their work in tourist towns, Asheville, Hendersonville, and so on, for the visitors to buy for souvenirs.
Sounds like a good job, Jebs offered.
Think so, boy? It might be if you liked it. But I was sort of different from the rest of my folks. Pottery making's an indoor career, and I wanted to be outdoors.
Pausing, Tasman shuffled to the doorway and sat down on the sill. His sightless eyes turned here and there as if striving to see the clearing in the trees.
I purely love the mountains, he resumed. You feel on top of everything when you're a mountain man. You realize why they call that part of North Carolina the land of the sky.
His eyes turned upward for a moment.
Well, I made pottery with the rest of the family while I was a kid, but I managed to get a scholarship. I went off to college, to Davidson College near Charlotte. I studied science and natural history. I wanted to spend my life learning and telling about the animals and plants of the mountains, maybe even writing books about them.
That would be a good life, too, said Randy.
You sound as if you might know what I mean, son. Well, when I finished college, I went back to the mountains. My mother's father had died, and he willed me a little farm he'd owned off in Jackson County. Lowlanders might laugh at a place like that. I guess it had more acres stood up on end than set flatwise, but it was high living any way you want to use those words. Why,
Tasman's sinewy hands gestured eloquently.
Standing up there on a tall point of those mountains and looking northward toward Asheville, you can see the peaks of the balsams so far away it makes you dizzy to think of the distance. And farther still, the Black Mountains, all covered with trees, and Mount Mitchell poking highest. And westward you see the Smokies, and nearer in around you the peaks like Pisgah and Hogback and Whiteside, with rivers and lakes kinda caught in among them like little trickles and puddles in the hands of giants. You boys go there someday and see the beauty I can't tell you.
You know the truth, said Jebs. I've never really been to the mountains, except Chimney Rock and Bat Cave. I've lived all my life in North Carolina, and I'm ashamed to say I've never got up there.
And the big things aren't any better than the little ones,
went on Tasman swiftly and eagerly.
I used to watch the birds, the little Carolina wren and the cardinals, and the woodpeckers and the mountain ravens. I stood where I thought I was about as high as a man could get, and I've seen a hawk sliding back and forth above me, so far up there that by comparison I might as well have been in a hole at the bottom of a valley. And animals, too. Wild cats, bears, foxes, and squirrels, and rabbits and deer, just like the beginning of time. And flowers more than any tongue could tell.
You make me wish I could see 'em, said Randy. The people, too.
The people, echoed Tasman. Mountain folks are fine folks. They live simply, but they're happy. They work hard and they play hard. The play parties I've been to, and the square dances with fiddle and guitar and accordion all playing the old songs. Of course, I had to work my farm, but I liked that. It was a sort of 3-story farm.
3-story farm? Said Jebs after him. How do you mean?
I had corn patches on 3 terraced places on the side of a slope. I'd get up there and chop weeds, cultivate, see the corn ripen and harvest it. It took 2 mules to haul a wagon up from one patch to another, and those mules needed all 8 of their feet for brakes on the way down. Past my place ran a stream from way up the mountain, one little cascade after another, maybe 100 in all. I called it 100 Falls. Here and there it made quiet pools, and there were trout in there. I used to fish for 'em. Trout's wonderful for breakfast. I reckoned to live my whole life up there, happy every day till my last one, but now...
His hands rose to his somber face.
But the lights started to get dim. Then they got gloomy. A doctor told me I was going blind, and when he told me that, I was so scared and sick that I broke him off in the middle of what he was saying. I called him names and walked out of his office, but he'd said the truth, and I had to give up my farm.
You had to sell it?
Suggested Jebs. his own face tragic.
No, I couldn't stand to do that. I rented it to a man I knew and dragged myself back home to make pottery for a living. The darker things got, the more I learned to depend on my fingers and ears, but my folks, my uncles and cousins, seemed to think this bad luck served me right. They hadn't liked my quitting the family business to be a farmer. They let me come back and work with them, but I didn't need eyes to know they were sneering. And anyway, the mountains aren't for a blind man.
I think I know what you mean, said Randy.
Do you? Do you know what it means to be afraid to take a step outdoors without somebody leading you, for fear you'll fall off a ledge or down a slope? I had to come someplace where it's flat here in the lowlands, so I can make a bluff at taking care of myself.
And you do take care of yourself, Randy said.
I get my farm rent, and I ship my pottery back to shops in the mountains. That will take all I make to sell. I pay those Indians who run errands for me. I make it worth their while. Here around this cabin, I know my way. I'm not beholden to anybody.
Of course not, agreed Randy, closing the book. Tasman started at the slight noise of the covers coming together.
Maybe I shouldn't say that much to you, Randy, he relented. I'm much obliged for your reading to me.
Jebs got up.
If you don't mind, Mr. Tasman, I'd like to see some of your pottery.
Well, come inside,
invited Tasman, and they followed him in. The cabin's interior was dim, and they moved slowly, but Tasman, sightless as he was, moved around it with the assurance of complete familiarity. In one corner, a cot was neatly made up with patchwork quilts and a pillow. Opposite stood an oil stove. Tasman stepped past his potter's wheel and touched with his hands a tier of shelves against the wall.
Here's a batch almost dry enough to glaze and bake, he said.
There were rows of cups and saucers, vases large and small, sugar bowls, cream pitchers, and plates.
You get your clay around here?
asked Randy. Tasman shook his gray head.
No, I have it shipped to me from near where I used to live. I still have that much of mountain soil here around me.
You said you baked this pottery, Mr. Tasman?
said Jebs.
Well, there's a little kiln out behind the cabin.
How do you know when a batch is ready to come out?
Tasman smiled his tense, tight smile. From the lowest shelf he lifted a big, cheap pocket watch and held it out. The crystal was missing.
I touch the hands to tell time, he said, and I can judge the right heat by holding my hand close to the kiln. My sense of feeling is like my sense of hearing, mighty sensitive, more sensitive than the feeling of sighted folks. For instance, he added, I know that it'll be raining before sundown. You two had better get started for home.
We'll do that thing, agreed Jebs. It's been nice talking to you, sir.
And I'll bring the book and read some more, promised Randy.
Thanks. Do that. Goodbye.
They started for the trail. Now that Tasman had mentioned it, there was a close, heavy feel to the air around them, and the clouds overhead shut out the sky like a great dull sheet of gray lead.
He's completely blind, all right,
Randy said to Jebs when they were out of hearing.
I almost bumped him in the nose with this book, and he didn't know it.
Too bad when he loves nature like that.
If he wanders out at night and those wild dogs rally round him, he may lose some of his love of nature, replied Jebs. And speaking of wild dogs, here comes one that isn't wild. Hey, Rebel.
As on the previous day, Rebel had come part way to meet them. He elected himself an escort party of one to convoy them back to New Chimney Pot House. They saw that Driscoll had brought the jeep back, for it stood in the front yard. Driscoll was down by the brook helping Sam Cohill to put the final touches on a small shed just below the newly installed water wheel. The shed had a foundation of stones, and its peaked roof was sheathed with stout cypress shingles left over from the work on the house. The whole structure was no larger than a big packing case, but neatly and strongly made.
So that's where the electric plant will live,
said Jebs, trotting down to look.
We've got it inside now, replied Driscoll. And here's the belt, ready to run from pulley to plant.
He twiddled heavy-duty wires protruding from a small hole in the shed's wall.
And here what will light us up like a Christmas tree.
Jebs and Randy helped string the wires to the house. Inside, Sam and Jebs secured the ends to a wiring system that was already connected to fixtures.
Now all we need is water to get things running, announced Jebs. Let's go outside and holler for the rain to come down.
You won't have to holler very loud, said Sam. Just as he spoke, there came a brisk patter of drops on the roof. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8. Randy Hunts Alone. The rain fell heavily all evening. Sam Cohill directed a relaxation of sentry duty, saying that no dogs, wild or otherwise, would willingly hunt in such a downpour. At night, the drumming of the storm on the roof and windows lulled everyone into a deep sleep. Sam's guess was right. Not even the vigilant rebel sensed anything like stealthy menace outside in the rush of rain. By morning, the torrent had slackened to a shower. While they dressed, the shower slackened to a drizzle. As Sam Cohill summoned the boys to breakfast, the last drops fell. The drained clouds shredded apart and sunlight came through.
"Give me a hand with this dishwashing,"
urged Driscoll, elbow deep in a pan of steaming hot water.
"Let's get out and see what's happening."
"At least we got our roof on in time," said Randy, glancing up at the dry rafters and sheathing. The dishes done, all three boys hurried into the soggy yard. Jebs, first in the open, stopped suddenly just beyond the doorway and flung up his hand in a signal for quiet.
"Hark at that,"
he said. Randy and Driscoll listened. "Something's roaring," commented Randy. "It sounds like a big wind." "Or like Niagara Falls," suggested Sam Cohill, lounging to the doorway like a mighty statue that had stepped down from its pedestal.
"Falls! That's it!"
cried Jebs.
"Come on, let's take a look at our dam."
And he was off, like a sprinter at the starting gun. Swift Randy barely overhauled him at the very stream's edge. The night's heavy rain had filled the stream and brought it to the very top of the dam. Water gushed over the spillway and down the flume, and the water wheel turned nimbly and smoothly in its solidly wedged hubs. Over and over turned the wheel, the buckets in its outer rim scooping themselves full from the descending rush of water and emptying as they trundled around and down, then rising for more. "How do you stop that thing to moor on the belt to the generator?" asked Randy.
"Easily enough,"
said Sam, stalking up from behind. He bent down like a living derrick and fitted a gate of planks, rather like a big lid for a chest, into the rear of the flume. The spouting rush of water ceased, the wheels turning subsided, and Sam braked it to a halt with a quick snatch of his strong hand.
"All right, get the belt adjusted,"
he said, and Jebs and Driscoll hurried to do so. Rapidly, they tested it for smoothness of progress over the pulleys, for tightness, and for strength.
"Let's try it now,"
called Driscoll. Sam hoisted the water gate from the flume. The returning gush of water smote the buckets of the wheel, forcing them down and turning both wheel and pulley. Inside the snug little shed rose the hum of machinery. Now Sam and Jebs lifted a trap-like section of the roof, gazed calculatingly inside, and gingerly made adjustments here and there. Randy and Driscoll walked back to the house. The two amateur electricians joined them as they reached the door.
"Snap that switch,"
said Sam, pointing, and Randy did so. A light dangling on its cord from the rafters glowed obediently.
"We got it!"
cried Jebs happily.
"Sam, you and I ought to get honorary degrees as electrical engineers. Now you can flip on your refrigerator. And maybe we can borrow young Lee Martin's electric railroad for Jebs to play with," said Driscoll. "To be right honest with you, Jebs, I didn't think you and Sam would get away with it."
"Neither did I," confessed Randy.
"Go ahead, lay it on us,"
urged Jebs, bowing to left and right as though to gales of applause.
"That sounds good, that wrong guess stuff. You're like the folks in Spain just after Columbus stopped the show with his famous egg trick. It was Sam and I who had to show the world what's what, and which side up it ought to lie."
He stood on tiptoe to clap Sam Cohill's great shelf of shoulder.
"Hark at the hurrahs, Sam. We'll go down in history with Edison and Steinmetz." "Who was Steinmetz?" asked Driscoll. "Sounds like the name of a big-time football player." "No, it's the name of a big-time electrical genius,"
Jeb informed him.
"Edison and Steinmetz. Cohill and Markham. We all belong in the Hall of Fame."
"I'll get Hobart Tasman to model busts of you to set up there," suggested Randy. "And speaking of Mr. Tasman, I wonder how the trail is leading to his cabin. I halfway promised him to come back today and read him some more Lives of the Hunted."
"I'm afraid you'll find the walking pretty sloppy after this big rain," said Sam. "The swamps come in pretty closely about the Chimney Pot estate, you know. There's a low stretch between here and Tasman's.
Every rain fills it up for a few hours, and then the soil soaks it up and drains it off.
Come with me to Martin's, Driscoll invited Randy. I want to tell him how our own private electrification program worked out.
Thanks, I'll stay here, demurred Randy. I've got a few things I want to think about.
Don't mess with Randy when he's thinking, Jebs advised Driscoll. That's a full-time job with him. Sometimes when he's thinking away full blast, he just about thinks his head clear off. Look, I'll ride with you to Martin's. Maybe I'll just have a gander at that electric railroad Mr. Martin's boy has.
The Jeep left, with Driscoll cocking his gray cap above the steering wheel and Jebs beside him. Sam Cohill moved ponderously through the wet front yard down to the waterside to observe again the workings of wheel and light plant, then back to where a great mass of flat rocks were stacked. With spade and grubbing hoe, the giant scraped a shallow hole before the very doorstep, carefully fitted a rock into it, then a second rock in front of that, and then another. He was making a stone walk, rough but workmanlike. Meanwhile, Randy visited the animals beyond the backyard. The two calves gazed at him with the mild curiosity of their kind. The chickens in their run made a sort of excited, squawking fuss. The pigs with white-banded black bodies were friendly too. Randy tested the strength of the stockade slab that Sam had nailed back after the wild dog adventure 2 nights before. He studied the places where the traps had been set and sprung. Jebs, Sam, and Driscoll had been so jubilant over the coming of electricity to New Chimney Pot House that they had forgotten, almost, the mystery and menace of the wild dog pack. But with Randy, as Jebs had said, thinking was a full-time job. Nobody had believed his story of a 2-legged monster among the dogs. Indeed, he was almost ready to admit that it had been a trick of his excited imagination. Hobart Tasman's mention of the werewolf superstition had made Randy ashamed of momentarily believing a fantasy, of being like Willie Dubbin in belief of something besides just dog nature in the pack. Yes, he had almost rejected the notion. Almost, but not quite. At the well behind the house, Randy drew a bucket of fresh water and carried it into the kitchen. Then he went to join Sam Cohill. The giant had already set 6 broad flat stones as the beginning of the paved walkway, and was prying big morsels of green moss from around nearby tree roots to set around and between these stones. Randy helped him for a while. "Sam," he said at length, "just how much ground does the old chimney pot estate cover?" "We've had a preliminary survey made and a few corner stakes driven," said Sam. "Later on we'll have to clear some sort of line through the trees to mark the property limits. You came in from the county road about 3 miles on your first night here, and for fully 2 miles of the way you were on Driscoll's land. Drowning Creek itself is the borderline one way, and the other runs approximately to a point out there." Sam pointed with his spade, lifting it like a pancake turner. "On beyond, it's a good 2 miles. I can't tell you until the final survey's finished, but there must be 6 or 7 square miles of land, mostly timber." "You're pointing almost to where Mr. Tasman lives," remarked Randy, but Sam shook his head. "No, you don't realize how the trail winds from here to Tasman's. There's a branch off from that trail to the property line marked by blazes on the trees, and the property line's blazed too. Tasman's shack is a mile behind here, and he's almost a mile from the property line." "And what's on the other side of the property line?" pursued Randy. "How close do other farms come to us?" Another shake of Sam's great head. "Oh, not close. The woods are pretty swampy, you know, and about 20 years back there bobbed up a dispute over ownership that hasn't been settled by law as yet. Things like that have kept Chimney Pot sort of unvisited for 3 generations or so. But when we blazed the trees along the line just about opposite Tasman's place, a couple of workmen said they spotted an old abandoned place of some sort on the other property. No signs of anybody living there, though. Probably it's been deserted for a good 20 years.
20 years? Echoed Randy eagerly. In other words, it was a lot more recent settlement than the old Chimney Pot house that stood empty since the end of the war between the states. I'd like to look at the abandoned place and see if it's really abandoned."
"Maybe we can all go later on," said Sam.
"Well, I'm going to try to see Mr. Tasman and read him some more Ernest Thomas Seton."
Randy returned to the house, took Lives of the Hunted from the shelf, and headed away for Tasman's. At the woodpile he possessed himself of a stout stick, as long as his leg and as thick as his wrist. Rebel, strolling around the yard, came and sniffed at the stick as though to approve Randy's decision to carry it. But when Randy tried to call him to come along on the walk, Rebel sat down and gave Randy a gaze of courteous refusal. Plainly, the bull terrier knew his duty as a guardian of the house and yard. Away strode Randy among the trees, but he had not walked for more than 5 minutes before he found the trail to Tasman's clearing blocked by a wide, dank puddle of rainwater that filled a low place for some yards and lay among the tree roots to both sides. There would be no visit to Tasman's for some hours at least. He turned to go and then paused and examined a tree beside the path. On that tree showed a big raw axe notch. He remembered Sam's mention of blazes showing the property line. It could not be far from here, Randy judged, though from Tasman's the distance would be a mile, almost the same distance as from here, close to Chimney Pot, to Tasman's. Into Randy's head came recollection of a formula learned in high school mathematics class. It was a mile from here to Tasman's, and a mile from Tasman's to the property line at approximately a right angle. Then those 2-mile-long distances would make the short sides of a right-angled triangle. The length of the property line between the point where this trail was joined to it and the point back of Tasman's would be what geometry books called the hypotenuse. Of course, none of these 3 sides of the triangle would be straight, but he considered them straight enough for the sake of working his problem. And you measured the length of a right-angled triangle's hypotenuse by remembering that the sum of the squares of the 2 smaller sides equaled the square of the hypotenuse. It would be something to do for a morning's adventure, was Randy's decision. If he could come to the point on the property line back of Tasman's, he ought to be able to see the signs of former habitation on the adjoining property. He wedged the book he carried into a low forking branch of the blazed tree and started away. As he walked, he worked the problem in his mind. He could divide each of those mile-long smaller sides into units of 1,000 feet each. 5 units to each side. The square of 5 was 25. 25 plus 25 was 50, the square of the hypotenuse. Now then, the square root of 50 would be 7 and a trifle over. He wouldn't be far off if he figured that when he had traveled the property line for nearly a mile and a half, he would be more or less directly back of Hobart Tasman's home. It was not far to where the string of blazed trees he followed joined another, running both ways. Taking the trail of the boundary, he used his wristwatch and counted paces to help himself figure the distance. Half an hour's walking brought him to where, as he estimated, he was nearly opposite the blind man's shanty. There he chose a tall oak tree, as big around at the roots as the arms of 3 men could span, and towering up in a great profusion of stout branches and waving foliage. The first fork was within reach. He scrambled into it, then mounted higher and higher. A squirrel went dancing away, loudly complaining of this invasion of its domain. Randy climbed actively to the upper branches, gaining a point from which he could look out over the treetops as over a great field of leafy bushes. But he could see nothing of New Chimney Pot House on his back track, or of the little retreat of Hobart Tasman. Both were lost in the woods. From where he sat in the high branches of the great oak, he might be looking over an endless world of forest. No sign of houses or roads. Wait! He had turned to look toward the property beyond the blazed line of the Chimney Pot property. Up ahead and not far was a sort of dimpled depression among the foliage, as though the trees sank away there to a stretch of smaller, younger growth. Randy's curiosity impelled him to find out what that was, and why it was there. Swiftly he lowered himself from branch to branch, picked up his stick from between 2 roots of the oak, and continued his way along the blazed trail. His eyes he kept fixed in the direction of that curious depression. Finally he stopped, took a pace or 2 away from the property line, and peered fixedly beyond. It wasn't a clearing, but it wasn't full of big trees either. Randy walked toward it, careful to remember the way back to the blazed line of trunks that would lead him again to New Chimney Pot House. The clearing held an orchard, of trees in straight rows, marshaled like ranks of soldiers on parade. Randy moved swiftly. He reached the nearest tree. What fruit was grown here? Peaches, plums, apples? It was an orchard, but not of fruit trees. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. Many Mysteries. Randy's frown, the crinkle that always marked his brown forehead when he was perplexed or intent, grew deep and tight. He looked at the line of trees, as regular and straight as though laid out with a huge ruler. They were an orchard, all right, but what wanted such an orchard? What could be gathered here? He examined the tree on which he had laid his hand, It was no larger than many fruit trees, and its age was hard to decide. The bark of its stem was thick, dark, reddish-brown, and deeply furrowed, as though it were many years old, yet the twigs that sprouted from the branches looked as bright fresh green as water grass, and their leaves were big and plentiful. He transferred his hand from the trunk to a twig, pulling it down to examine. 3 big leaves grew on that twig, no 2 of them alike. One leaf, about 4 inches long, made a smooth oval shape, its outer edges curving into 2 arcs to the point at the free end. But directly beside that oval leaf grew another, from one edge of which jutted out a smaller lobe. It looked like a green mitten with a separate thumb. And the third leaf was divided into 3 points, like a vegetable paw. The mitten leaf and the paw leaf looked almost alive, almost ready to clutch and squeeze. Randy let go of the twig, and it snapped upward from his fingers. "Sassafras," he said aloud. "What's the use of an orchard of sassafras?" He stood there and remembered all that he had ever heard about sassafras. There seemed to be plenty to remember, for sassafras had always stuck in his mind as a plant with strange characteristics and equally strange folklore. No other growth had leaves of different shapes on the same branch, sometimes in the same cluster. To even an expert botanist, if he had never seen or heard about sassafras, those 3 different shapes of leaves would signify different kinds of a tree or bush. No wonder both the Indians and the white settlers had thought it as a magical plant, had believed that it could be brewed for a curse or a spell. Anyway, here was a carefully planted orchard of it. Randy started to walk between the rows of sassafras trees, then drew back. He argued with himself that he wasn't superstitious. Maybe he had just heard too many strange stories from Willie Dubbin and Hobart Tasman. It must be that fact that made the strange orchard seem somehow menacing. He decided to skirt it on his way to find out whatever might be beyond. Walking along the orchard's edge, he held his stick poised in his hand, like a club or saber. Things were balefully still. He was aware of the swish of his feet among leafy weeds, the faint stir of wind in the branches of the sassafras trees, a sudden twittery exchange between birds. Randy wished that Jebs were with him, solid and bright-humored, to dispel the creepy sensations that seemed to trudge along beside him. He wished, too, that he had told Sam where he was going, after finding the way to Tasman's blocked by puddles. "I'm acting like a little kid in a haunted house," he scolded himself. "And I'm not a little kid, and there isn't any house, haunted or otherwise." But just then, moving clear of the orchard, he saw a house, and the house looked haunted. Not that it was a huge, tumble-down old ruin such as Chimney Pot House had been when Randy first saw it the September before. As a matter of fact, this house was small and seemed to be in fairly good repair. It was built of logs, squared into timbers and notched so that they fitted at the corners. Between the logs, rough plaster filled the spaces. The foundation was of rocks, holding the wooden walls well above the earth from which termites might otherwise have swarmed. Its pitched roof was covered with shingles, thinner cut and far older than those Randy had helped to nail on New Chimney Pot House. All in all, it was not a new house, but not a ruined one either. Perhaps had it stood in open country with sunlight upon it, a well-cultivated yard and garden stretching along its sides and in front, and a bustle of activity inside and out, it would have looked even cheerful. Seeing it under such conditions, Randy might have thought it old-fashioned and a trifle roughly built, yet comfortable and kindly. But, tucked as it was among towering trees, with a closer packing of thickets where once the nearer land had been cleared and no sound of movement detectable in or near it, that log house seemed cloaked in mystery. Randy remembered an old North Carolina legend about the monster called a gardenel. A gardenel, according to the tale-tellers, looked like a house, but wasn't a house. It stood silently in some out-of-the-way place, hoping to tempt a careless stranger to walk in at its mouth that was shaped like a door. And once inside that door-like mouth, the visitor never came out again. "Hello?" called Randy and waited. No answer. Even the slight breeze seemed to have died away. The leaves and branches of the sassafras trees had fallen silent, motionless, as though they wanted to help Randy listen. "Is anybody home?" tried Randy again. Still no answer. No answer in the house, or the woods, or anywhere except inside Randy himself. His heart had begun to beat louder and faster than usual. That heart of his seemed to be trying to act as if he was frightened. Randy snorted in disdain of any such notion. "I'm going to see what this is all about," he told himself, and walked closer to the house, his stick still held clubwise in his ready right hand. The rough door of cleated planks he saw opened inward and was pushed almost shut. A window on either side of the door had panes of glass, all but one of them unbroken. That was because this house was so far from any path along which strollers were likely to approach, decided Randy. A deserted house, and this one surely was deserted, was always a fair mark for the thrown stones and clods of any passing idler. Randy looked at the weed-grown soil in front of the door. It looked as though the weeds were worn away in a sort of path, but he could make out no tracks. Last night's heavy rain would have wiped away any tracks when it came to that. Randy peered to right and left where clumps of brush lay close against the house. He turned and looked back toward the riddlesome orchard of sassafras trees. Nothing made a sound or motion, but Randy did not feel comforted by this silence. He nerved himself once again, walked up to the big flat rock that made an uneven front step, and knocked on the planks of the door with the stick in his hand. The blows rang in Randy's nervous ears like so many pistol shots, and boomed and echoed inside the house. He waited. Still no sound, no hint of a sound, except for what he was making himself. He pushed the end of the stick against the door. It gave back on its hinges with a rasping slowness as though it objected to Randy's invasion. He peered into the house, then put his foot on the doorstep and hoisted himself inside. The house seemed to contain only one room, and that room was quite empty. Stout boards were fastened to each wall by rusty old iron brackets as though to serve for shelves. There was a stovepipe hole with traces of ancient soot around it, but the stove had been taken away long ago. Randy poked into a corner where lay an old tin plate and a coffee pot with its rusty bottom punched in. Then he walked to where a door was set at the rear, a big hook holding it shut. He looked up at the roof. It had horizontal rafters at about 7 feet from the rough but solid floor, rafters made of lengths of pine trunk with the bark still on them. Above these rose the shadowy, triangular vault of the roof's inside. He could see only 1 or 2 chinks in the old shingles. Plainly this house had been well built, and plainly it had resisted wind and rain for a number of years all by itself. Randy lounged with an arm flung upon one of the shelves. "I'll have to bring the rest of the bunch here to have a look," he thought to himself. "Sam and Jebs and Driscoll." "Hey!" He suddenly yelped aloud and jumped from near the wall to the center of the floor, for his hand, idly drumming on the surface of the shelf, had brushed against something. Something shaggy. Randy had made 6 swift steps toward the door before he regained control of himself. He turned to stare back at the shelf, his heart racing, his teeth clenched and bared. He lifted the stout stick, ready to attack or to defend himself. The shelf was half in shadow from another shelf above it. He could see that something lay upon it, flat and long, like a crouching weasel or cat. The thing did not move, but there was a stealthy, drawn-in look about it. Narrowing his eyes to see better, Randy made out that it was pale in color with dark blotches. He took a plucky step toward it again, the stick lifted. "Hey, you!" he addressed it. It did not stir. Randy took 2 more steps, extended the end of his staff, and prodded. The hairiness yielded softly. The thing seemed to draw away. Randy poked again, more strongly this time, with a stirring pressure. Then he jumped back, for the spotted mass suddenly poured itself over the edge of the shelf and tumbled with a strange clink of sound upon the floor. Randy stood his ground, studied the mystery, then grinned in relief that had something of shame in it. "Just an empty skin," he announced to comfort himself with the sound of his own voice. He walked toward it, turned it over with the stick, and finally stooped and took it in his hand. It was a coat or jacket that had been flung on the shelf. Randy examined the material. Cowskin, tanned with the shaggy hair on. It was white with mottlings of dark brown. He turned the jacket this way and that. It was an old one, but well repaired. A rip in one sleeve had been sewn up with stout thread, a recent mending, Randy judged. And the leather of the jacket was supple and pliable. That meant it was no discarded garment. Had it lain long on the shelf, it would be stiff and dry. No, it must have been worn recently, and frequently. As he studied the thing more closely, he discovered the reason for the clink on the floor. At one side and front was sewn a pocket. like a patch of the mottled cowskin. Into this was thrust a rod of bright silvery metal. Randy drew it forth to examine. The object was cylindrical, perhaps 6 inches long and half an inch in diameter. One end of the cylinder was closed, the other open, and an inch or so from the open end a notch appeared in the side. Randy fingered the open end in the notch. "It looks like a whistle," he decided in his mind, and put it to his lips. He blew hard, but no sound came. He studied it again, then he blew a second time, once more without success. Apparently it wasn't a whistle after all. Then what was it? A fountain pen? If so, he could not see how it worked. Might it be a telescope? He put the open end to his eye, but he was unable to see anything but darkness. Giving up, he thrust the object back into the pocket of the cowskin coat. He returned the thing to the shelf where he had found it, trying to arrange it in the same position as before. Then he made a final pacing tour of the house's interior, making what observations he could. His mind assessed tags of evidence. A hairy jacket, white with dark spots. That registered in his memory. Bugler, the dog, was a dark spotted white. So had been the creature that had freed a dog from one of Sam's traps 2 nights before. And as for the jacket, it was never made to be worn by an animal. A man, 2-legged, as Randy had insisted, though his friend scoffed, had worn it, had been there at the raid on the pig pen. He would go and fetch his friends. When they saw that jacket, they would believe him. They would insist no longer that his imagination had played him tricks, and they would help him find the 2-legged jacket-wearer who ran at night with wild dogs. Randy glanced at his watch. It was past 12 o'clock. Sam and Jebs and Driscoll would be wondering why he did not come back to dinner. He had better return at once to New Chimney Pot House to tell his adventure. Stick in hand, he walked toward the open door. Then, as he set his foot on the sill, a snarling chorus rose outside. Dogs were dashing through the sassafras orchard, straight for the door and for Randy. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. Besieged. For one stunned, paralyzed moment, Randy froze where he stood, gazing at that oncoming flood of dogs. There were lots of them at that first glimpse, and they were of all sizes and colors, but one and all they headed full at him as fast as they could come. In the very forefront of the headlong horde raced a big shaggy brute, its long coarse hair grubby white with dark spots. That was Bugler, Randy thought, somewhere in his startled, terrified mind. And none of them barked as they came. They only rushed, with a concerted snarl, deadly and soft. All these impressions smote Randy in perhaps half a second of time. In the next half-second, he hurled the club he carried full at the spotted leader of the charge. Nimbly the beast dodged, but his speed faltered with the sideward hop, and Randy had time to drop back, catch at the edge of the door, and swing it around. Too late. They were already at the door. The leader's baleful, spotted head thrust in, and Randy shoved the door against his neck. Wedged there, the head tossed and strained, sharp teeth snapping at Randy. Other shapes were buffeting the walls and the door planks. Randy let go and ran back through the house toward the rear door. But as his hand reached for the hook that closed that rear door, he heard the impact of a flying body against it. One of the pack had run around to cut off his chance for escape by that route. Meanwhile, he heard the front door creak and quiver as the spotted leader thrust it open with a fierce wriggle of his body. Claws slapped the boards of the floor. They were coming in. Overhead were the rough pine cross timbers. Leaping high, Randy caught one. With a burst of strength, increased by his sense of danger, he drew himself up as though he were chinning himself on a bar. Below him he heard a harsh snap of teeth, and almost lost his hold as something tugged at the slack of his trouser leg. He kicked out furiously with his other foot. It encountered yielding flesh, and a yelp rang out. As the dog opened its mouth to emit that angry yelp, Randy heaved his body up on the rafter, flung a leg across to help bear and balance his weight. Lying full on the rafter, he looked down. The front door had been pawed and heaved open, and the space beneath him seemed full of dogs. They leaped and snarled below his timber refuge, a many-colored knot of them, but they did not bark. Alert, watchful, fierce, they gathered and milled and looked up at him. Their eyes were dark and shiny. Their mouths grinned, showing rows of strong, sharp teeth.
"You're a fine mob of brutes," he addressed them. "I thought you didn't run except in the night time."
Crooning growls replied to him as though they understood his angry taunt. Several of the dogs sat down. Others paced back and forth. Balancing himself on high, Randy counted them. 8, 9, 10. The spotted dog Bugler held the point directly below Randy's perch. Near Bugler shoved a red-brown, rangy fellow, with dangling ears and a long, round-tipped muzzle like a hound, a dog taller than Bugler but not as strongly made. Another had short, coarse fur of a swarthy gray that made Randy think of wolves. Wolf-like, too, were its sharp snout and large, erect ears, and the bushy tail that curved upward and forward over its back. Into the blood mixture of that dog, Randy guessed, had gone German Shepherd, Chow, and 1 or 2 other strains. These 3 were the largest. 1 or 2 of the smaller specimens looked fluffy and nimble, but not even the smallest looked friendly. All of them watched Randy. They seemed eager to get close to him, almost droolingly eager.
"Get on out of here," he scolded them. "Who invited you anyway?"
As before, they showed fierce response to the sound of his voice. Stiff-legged, Bugler danced below him and showed his teeth in a grinning threat. The wolfish dog uttered a low woof that was neither growl nor bark, but a baleful combination of the two. Randy gazed longingly at the open door. If he could get close to it, he might drop down, slip quickly out, and slam it behind him to imprison these threateners. Cautiously, he reached out for another timber, tested its solidity, took firm hold, and transferred his body to it. Beyond was another, to which he proceeded to swing, but the dogs moved with him, a watchful group, all upturned eyes and half-opened mouths of full teeth. One, the red-brown hound, slid clear of the others and paused at the very sill of the door, as though on guard against an attempt to reach it.
"You don't want me to leave you, eh?"
said Randy, and the hound lolled out its tongue and smiled, but not with any good humor. Randy subsided on the new cross timber. He racked his brain for some plan of escape. At present he was safe. Lying full length at a point 7 feet from the floor, he could not be reached by the highest leaper among his besiegers. But suppose he was kept there for hours, with hunger and thirst and weariness setting in. He might even be kept there into the night. He might grow drowsy, might go to sleep. Then his hold would loosen, and he might fall down among all those tearing fangs. He snorted at the thought. "I've got to figure out a way out of this," he lectured himself. Once, years ago, he had read an adventure story in which a situation like this had risen. The hero, a buckskin-clad hunter on the old frontier, had been chased up a tree by a pack of famished wolves. He had been forced to drop his empty gun, but with him into the branches he had carried his hunting knife in his belt sheath. Tying this to a long stout pole, the hunter had used it as a spear to stab from above. He had killed several of the wolves. Then, while the rest of the creatures had ripped and torn like cannibals at the bodies of their dead comrades, he had scrambled away through other treetops and so to safety. Bracing himself on the cross timber with both legs and one hand, Randy used the other to explore his pockets. From one of them he produced his large and useful jackknife, with a long blade of well-whetted steel. This he opened with his teeth and the fingers of his free hand. The metallic snick of the blade made the dogs stir into motion below him.
"You see this?"
he said as though they could understand him, and held the knife down toward them.
"I've got a tooth of my own, and I doubt if any of you want to be nibbled by it."
Plainly they were not daunted. Bugler made a leap toward the down-extended hand. He fell short with a fierce snap of his jaws.
"Do that again!"
Randy dared him. He lay flat on the rafter, twined his legs around it, then reached out at arm's length with the knife. Bugler did it again, a higher leap, but still short. As the spotted body rose toward him, Randy tried to slash with his knife. He missed the dog and almost toppled from his perch with the effort. Heart beating like a drum roll, he tightened his grip, still keeping the knife in his fist. Just under him, the dogs all snarled, growled, and leaped in eagerness to get hold of him. Randy's thoughts returned to the improvised spear with which the hunter in the story had fought to save himself. He studied the timber on which he lay, then the sloping upper rafters that supported the roof above his head. Like the horizontal beams, they were lengths of pine, squared on one side to fit against the planks of the roof's sheathing. He took hold of the nearest and tugged as hard as he could, but it was solidly fastened, and it was too big to make a spear shaft even if he could drag it loose. Nor could he split off a proper length with no better or bigger tool than his knife. He tapped at the sheathing boards. At once the dogs burst into an angry chorus of growling protest at the knock-knock Randy's knuckles made. Bugler turned toward the door, his eyes fierce.
"Thought somebody else was coming here to call, did you?" said Randy. "Hush that fuss. I'm going to be busy."
He shoved hard against the sheathing. In one place a board creaked. Its nails were loose, and he worked it back and forth, then pried it sidewise from the roof timber. Bracing himself on his cross-beam perch, he brought all his strength to bear. A section of the board broke at a weak point where there was a knot and came away free. Randy flung it down, and the dogs scattered to avoid its fall. Then Randy looked at the underside of the exposed shingles. They were old and dry, and when he struck them with his fist, they flaked off. Light showed through. Randy grinned, and his eyes snapped. Perhaps here was the way of escape. With his hands and the knife, he worked away at the shingles until they had made a sizable opening. He thrust his right arm out, the knife in his hand, and chopped and hacked at the shingles outside and around the hole. He could feel them breaking away and sliding down the outer slope. Thus he worked for some minutes until he judged that he had cleared a space several feet square to expose the sheathing boards. Again he shoved and applied pressure. The boards gave. He scrambled along the cross timber, managed to get his shoulder against the sheathing, and surged with all his strength. A strident crackling noise informed him that another piece was breaking away. Now there was enough of a hole above him to allow his head to pass through. Rising carefully to one knee on the timber and holding the sloping rafters above it with both hands, he looked out. He saw that the boards to either side of the gap were more strongly fastened, and when he tugged at them they resisted his efforts. But he brought his knife into play again. With all his strength and determination he commenced whittling along the edges of the hole. Big chips and slivers fell down into the house. He could hear the dogs sniffing, snarling, and protesting as these light missiles pelted them. The work grew hard, and Randy felt weary and sweaty, but he kept at it. For more than an hour he painstakingly enlarged that hole in the roof. Finally, putting his knife between his teeth, he shoved his head out again. His shoulders followed. It was a tight squeeze, but he got both arms into the open, shoved down on the roof, and forced his body clear. He drew his legs after it, and finally stood up astride the ridgepole, folding and pocketing his knife again. Loudly and gratefully he sniffed the open air. It was like finding the way out of a dungeon. Then he made a survey of the roof. Toward one end rose a length of the old stovepipe in lieu of a chimney. Turning from this, he cast his eyes about for a way down. Most of the trees close at hand were small, brushy, and full of young green leaves. However, against the eaves at one side towered a broad-trunked, wide-branched old sycamore, close enough for two sturdy limbs to thrust out almost horizontally above the edge of the roof. Randy moved down the slope toward them, caught hold of the largest, and swung himself into the tree. He scrambled along like a young ape toward the trunk. Getting down would be easy. But even as he told himself these things, he was aware with sinking heart that the dogs had poured out of the house, and were gathering around the sycamore like dancers around a maypole. Their canine sense of hearing, keener than that of any human being, had told them what was going on. Bugler raised himself, strong forepaws against the patchy bark of the sycamore's trunk, and crinkled his muzzle to show his teeth at Randy. "Don't you ever know when you're not wanted?" Randy said, and again produced his knife. The sycamore was not the sort of tree from which one easily got a strong, straight piece of wood for a spear shaft, but after scrambling and searching, Randy chose a branch of fairly good length and a proper thickness. It was not as straight as he would have liked, but it must do. He whittled it around and around until he could snap it free. Then, sitting on a big bough with his shoulders against the trunk, he trimmed away the shoots and twigs. From one of his moccasins he undid the leather tie-thong, and with this he lashed his knife firmly to the end of the branch, to serve as the point of his spear. Thus armed, he lowered himself through the branches to a point just above the highest leaps of the dogs. He tried to thrust down at Bugler, then at the wolfish one, but both of them skipped away, circling the tree. Disgusted with this unsuccessful warfare, Randy mounted through the upper forks again, returned along the two big boughs, and dropped down on the roof once more. He jabbed the knife blade into the shingle so that his makeshift spear jutted upward. He looked at his watch. It was past 2 o'clock. Dinner would be over at New Chimney Pot House. His friends would wonder what had happened to him. Randy felt both hungry and thirsty. The bright sun beat powerfully down upon him. His ears seemed to sing with its heat. He scratched one of them, but the singing noise kept on. He looked down from the eaves at the dogs who maintained their sentry duty beneath him. "Whatever's making that noise, it isn't you," he told them, "and I don't feel like singing myself." He glanced around and listened yet again. "It seems to come from that stovepipe yonder." He gazed at the upright black cylinder at the apex of the roof. Was it vibrating in some strange manner? He walked along the ridgepole toward the pipe. The singing grew louder and nearer, a steady and rhythmic hum. Curiosity overrode Randy's other thoughts and feelings. He came close to the pipe and glanced into its shadows. Then rapidly and nervously he backed away again. He went clear to the opposite end of the roof and sat down. Dejectedly he shook his dark head from side to side. He mopped sweat from his face. "That's all I need up here with me," he groaned. "A big nest of wasps." End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11. Wasps Can Be Helpful. At any other time, without danger below and around him, Randy might have observed the wasps with cautious interest. Nature's ways had always been his fascinated study, and he knew something about wasps and would be glad to find out more. Just then, however, he regarded them only as possible assailants who might at any time come buzzing around, might even come near to driving him off the roof where he had found refuge. The nest inside of the stovepipe was of clay, neatly and even cleverly built. Hobart Tasman, the human potter, would have recognized the skillful instinct of these little winged clay workers. The early North Carolina spring had seen the start of that nest when a lone queen wasp began a colony by building a few cells and depositing eggs in them. Those eggs had soon hatched into worker wasps that built more cells for more eggs and more hatchings. A visit to the rooftop toward the end of summer might find a community of more than 100. Even now there must be at least 20 or 30, and more hatching in the little clay snuggeries. The cells, built close together, made a sort of lining that extended all the way around the pipe, several inches inside its upper opening. As Randy watched from where he had set himself as far away as possible, several buzzing explorers bobbed in and out. "Wasps are carnivorous," he remembered. "They grab spiders to carry home and seal up for the young grubs to eat. I've seen them foraging." He wiped away more sweat, for the salt and perspiration attracts wasps. One lean, swift little scout on its way to the colony in the stovepipe sang past his head like a malicious bullet. He forced himself not to duck. A quick movement might startle and infuriate the owner of a most unpleasant natural dagger. "I can't stay up here forever with those jet fighters raiding all around me," thought Randy gloomily. "If enough of them jab you, you can be in serious shape. I've heard of people getting enough stings to land them in a hospital. My best stunt would be to plug that pipe somehow." But how could he plug it? He looked around at the old shingles on which he braced himself. After a moment he chose one of the largest near at hand and carefully pried it loose. It came away whole in his fingers. The noise of his prying attracted the dogs below, and they prowled close to that point, but to his relief no wasps flew near. Next, Randy divested himself of his shirt. Stripped to the waist, he felt all the more vulnerable should wasps stage an attack. Whatever he did, he had better do it quickly. Rising, he moved as quietly as he could toward the pipe. In his right hand he held the shingle, in his left the shirt. From inside the black cylinder issued the muttering hum of the wasps. Swiftly and surely Randy came near, cautiously raised the shingle. Then he clamped it down flat on top of the pipe. At once the hum increased to a buzzing roar, like a sudden start of a motor. The shingle under Randy's clamping palm rattled and quivered with the pattering blows of many flying bodies, tiny but vigorous. Had he not held the shingle in place, it might have been knocked clear. With his other hand, Randy threw his shirt over the shingle, drew it tightly down all around, and used the sleeves to bind it snugly around the pipe to hold the shingle in place. From ground level he heard Bugler's voice, almost snoringly vibrant, as though the spotted chief of the dog pack was both perplexed and irritated. "That's that," said Randy aloud, his voice triumphant. "I'm through with those wasps. Or am I?" He looked at his watch again. It was past 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Wasps or no wasps, Bugler and his band of four-legged outlaws still held Randy trapped on the roof. And if it was 3 o'clock now, in 3 more hours it would be 6. After that the sun would sink and go down. Randy shivered, hot though he was. He was thinking of how he might be forced to spend the night on the roof of this mysterious old house, next to an orchard of sassafras trees and hemmed in on all sides by a throng of beasts. Yes, and at sundown a certain baleful two-legged thing might come looking for that cow-skin coat and the unknown tool or weapon in its pocket. "Wasps up here," he said, "and dogs down there. I only wish there was some way to bring them together and let them cancel each other out." Again he studied the pipe, now closed by shingle and shirt. Its upper joint was fully 3 feet long and clamped onto a lower piece of pipe almost at roof level. He came close, took hold, and cautiously worked that upper section forward and backward. Inside, the wasps churned and sang and strove to get out. He might drag the joint free, but the imprisoned little warriors inside would immediately swarm out and over him. He shifted the pipe more delicately. It seemed loose. Randy's frown of meditation deepened on his face as he puzzled. Then he came to a decision. "I was right when I said that all I needed was a wasp nest," he told himself. Again he made a patrol of the roof's slopes. He found a shingle of the right size and detached it, always with the dogs below for company, and returned with it to the pipe. There he squatted on his moccasin heels, 1 foot on either side of the ridgepole. On his knees he carefully balanced the shingle. Then with both hands he began, slowly and cautiously, to loosen the top joint of the pipe. The grumpy war song inside swelled to a roar, traveling up and down the whole pipe. Probably a squad of wasps, like little airborne commandos, waited at the point where the 2 pieces of pipe threatened to come apart. That, said Randy, would not do. With the utmost of gingerly care he continued his loosening operation. The joints fitted together, one corrugated rim over another. He slid the upper part an inch, 2 inches, along the lower. When he judged that they were almost ready to show open space between, he edged closer, the shingle still on his knees. He put his naked left arm around the pipe as it wobbled all but free. With his right hand he smacked the upper shingle resoundingly. At once the vibration inside seemed to shift. There was a bombardment of sound under the shingle at the top, like a brisk rainstorm falling upward. The wasps were all gathering there at his knock. He took the second shingle in his right hand. "Now," he said, to signal himself. Up came the pipe, under went the shingle, and he lowered the pipe upon it. He drew a sigh of relief, his cheek resting against the rusty black metal that sang inside with the wings of his captives. Between the shingle lashed above and the shingle he held below, he had shut up a whole community of wasps, and they didn't like it. "I know just how you feel," he addressed them. "I've been trapped myself for more than 3 hours. I'll give you plenty of dogs to take revenge on." Holding the entire arrangement carefully and tightly, Randy hoisted himself erect from his full knee squat. He turned around, then moved step by step along the ridgepole. He studied the ground below. On the side of the house opposite the sycamore was a space of fairly clear ground. Down the slope toward it he walked, as slow and apprehensively as though he were advancing over a surface paved with eggs. Close to the very eaves he paused. He raised his voice. "Hey!" he yelled. "Ahoy! Down there below! Hurry, hurry, hurry! I got a present for you!" With the fingers of the hand that held the pipe, he tapped against the metal. It resounded like a tom-tom, and the dogs came from everywhere as he had foreseen. He saw Bugler. He saw the wolfish specimen with the bushy tail, the red-brown hound, all the others. As they came close beneath, he quickly counted them. All 10 were there. They looked as though they expected and waited his downward jump.
"Here's your treat," Randy called to them. "It's something very special, something every wild dog should experience and enjoy. Ready, gentlemen? 1, 2, 3. Stand by to receive supplies."
Down among them he hurled the shirt-swaddled stovepipe. He waited, teetering on his toes at the very eaves, long enough to see the pack scatter away from the falling object. Then, as it bounced on the ground, they charged back at it from all sides. The agile bugler, first to reach it, had his teeth in Randy's shirt, was rending it away. Randy waited no longer. He whirled around, raced back up the slope of the roof, over the ridgepole, and down the other side. His improvised spear still stuck, handle up, before him. Without slackening his pace, he shot out his hand and snatched it free. He gained the place where the sycamore's branches projected within reach, caught hold, and swung himself upon it. At that very instant there rang out in the bright afternoon a shrill, startled howl of pain, which was echoed by a whole chorus of cries. The wasps were out of their nest, out of the pipe, and had gone into deadly action against the nearest living things they could find. Randy grinned fiercely as he scrambled along, made his way to the trunk and beyond, then along another swaying branch on the opposite side. Just beyond the sycamore grew a sturdy young pine, emerging from its sapling stage. As Randy spied it, a daring inspiration came, and he nerved himself to it. He leaped with all his strength from the sycamore, caught hold of the pine's top with his free arm, and let his whizzing weight carry him forward. He seemed to soar as though his shoulders had sprouted gigantic wasp wings. But the springy young pinewood slowed his headlong flight, and the tree bent itself down and down. He saw the ground coming up from below, swiftly but not too swiftly. This must be like a parachute jump, he had time to think. Judging the point where the pine bent closest to the ground, he let go and dropped, landing on his knees and his free hand. At once he was up again, running like the wind. Behind him the pine snapped erect once more, and he could hear the dogs yelping and screaming their frightened pain as stings jabbed their hides. Away sped Randy. Never, he knew, had he run faster on football field or cinder track, and never had he known a better reason to run. He buck-jumped and broke sideways, right and left, to avoid smashing into trees, but he did not slacken his pace for them. Blundering through some waist-high scrub, he saw a trunk up ahead, and on that trunk was a notch. It meant that he had come to the blazed line of the chimney pot property. Those blazes would show him the way back to New Chimney Pot. He strove to increase speed. His swift feet had carried him a long distance in that mighty spurt. Already the racket of the dogs sounded muffled behind him. Again a grin touched his lips as he ran. Those wasps must have driven any thought of a cornered boy clear out of their minds. He sneaked a backward glance over his shoulder. No, he had been wrong. Something pursued him. It was the wolf gray dog with the big ears, sharp muzzle, and bushy tail. Somehow this single member of the pack had sensed or guessed Randy's retreat and scrambled through the trees. Now it was racing after him, and it came along in murderous silence. Even as he spied it, it overtook him in great grim leaps that cut down his lead all in a few moments. He spun around and made a stand, panting and gasping because he must not let himself be seized from behind. In his hand, almost forgotten in that wild fight, was his spear. The spear he had made of a knife, a sycamore branch, and a moccasin thong. He had not time to bring it into proper play as the wolfish dog drove close and sprang. He could only swing the butt of the branch like a club. That heavy, blunt branch end struck the dog in mid-leap with all of Randy's desperate strength behind it. A furious cry of pain rang out, and the gray body fell short. Landing on its side, the dog jumped up and danced backward, nimbly as a skillful boxer looking for an opening. They stood, glaring and tense, the boy and the beast. Another murderous snarl, another rush and spring. Randy had had a moment to bring the point of his weapon around, and he thrust with it to meet the oncoming danger. Clumsily and hastily fashioned, the spear was not a good one, and Randy had no experience or knowledge of such stabbing warfare. The blade did not go properly home, but gashed and ripped the coarse-furred shoulder and slid along the ribs. Again the dog broke away and paused, half crouching, ears back and teeth bared. Blood spattered its flank. But Randy did not wait for a third leap. He charged on his own account, the spear grasped in both hands and its point driving ahead of him. He struck at the sharp muzzle, which did not duck quite far enough out of the way. The steel blade reached and tore through one of the big pointed ears. Again, a yelp of angry pain. Randy smote down with the shaft once more, a solid rib-rattling blow that almost flattened his enemy to the ground. The dog yelped once more. Suddenly, it had had enough. It turned and fled back the way it had come. Randy, the victor, did not stand there exulting. The wounded beast would seek its companions again. They would understand what had happened and would come in force to drag him down. He took to his heels again, breathing heavily but still able to make a fast run of it. He was backtracking himself along that blazed trail. He saw, or thought he saw, trees and thickets he remembered. He must be getting close to the point where the side trail turned off toward New Chimney Pot House. Meanwhile, if the dogs overtook him, there were still trees to climb, and maybe he had learned something about fighting with a spear. Maybe he could thrust and jab. He came to an abrupt halt, his moccasin heels striking deep into the moist earth to act as brakes. Again he clamped his spear in both hands, ready for action. Something crashed through twigs and bushes up ahead, coming his way. Randy's blood surged in his ears, but he could hear the noise, louder, closer. It was something two-footed. The strange friend of the wild dogs? He brought his point around into thrusting position. He set his teeth and narrowed his eyes.
"Hey!"
bawled a young voice.
"Randy, is that you?"
"Jebs!" cried Randy, happier at meeting his friend than ever in all of their adventures together. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12. Return to the scene. At sight of Randy, Jeb's square-flushed face crinkled into a grin of welcome. Jeb's fair hair was in extra special disorder. In one hand he held a book, in the other a knotty club.
"Put up that stabbing iron," he said. "Where's your shirt? Why, the Jungle Boy makeup. Who do you think you are, Ugg the Stone Age man?"
Wariness suddenly rushed over Randy like floodwater. He stood still, his knees weak and his feet unsteady. Gulping great lungfuls of air, he looked at his friend and waited for strength and wind to speak.
"The whole bunch is beating the brush for you," went on Jebs. "It isn't like you to miss dinner, especially as good a dinner as you knew there'd be. We kept some chow hot, but the more we wondered where you were, the more you didn't show up."
Let's not stand here," Randy managed to gurgle out. "Let's keep moving. This isn't a very healthy spot."
"Come on, then,"
said Jebs, and turned. Randy and he walked along together. Randy kept tight hold of his spear and glanced back.
"We're almost home," said Jebs. "Why are you gawking back over your shoulder? You act like somebody about to be sneaked up on."
"That's what I am," Randy said as his breath returned. "After you and Driscoll left this morning, I started out for Hobart Tasman's."
"Sure enough you did. You told Sam Cohill that. When we started looking for you, we headed over to Tasman's little pottery shop about 2:30. You picked a right muddy day to call on him. We had all the waiting we wanted through the swamps and sloughs on the trail."
"But I didn't go there after all," said Randy.
"I know that. When we reached Tasman's, he allowed that he hadn't heard from you all day. He acted jumpy and timid with Sam and Driscoll there. I reckon he still worries about how big Sam sounds stomping around. Anyway, we decided to put in a search for you. Sam and Driscoll were leading the way back, thinking you might have shown up at New Chimney Pot, and I was trailing along behind. Then I saw where you'd left this book in the fork of a tree."
He held out Lives of the Hunted.
"I stopped right at that point and studied the ground," went on Jebs. "There was the blaze trail leading off this way, and I started along it. Sure enough, I spotted your tracks here and there, then I heard a sort of yipping and yowling like one of those wild dogs, and I speeded up. Next minute, I ran smack into you. What goes on?"
"It's a long story, and I'll tell it to you later," said Randy. "Right now, let's save our breath for traveling. You heard a wild dog, all right. I had to fight him."
"In broad daylight, sure enough? Let's not tarry by the way, then."
Even those few moments of slow progress had recruited Randy's strength and wind. The two boys set out at a jog trot for New Chimney Pot House. No pursuit showed itself behind, and at last they slackened their pace. Randy began to tell Jebs his adventures of the afternoon, and Jebs listened with increasing excitement.
"Great day in the morning,"
he said when Randy paused in the recital. "That's the kind of thing a fella dreams about and wakes up hollering, huh? Where's this deserted shack you found? Let's go back and see what we can do about those dogs. I don't like what you tell me about them."
"We don't go back without more help," vowed Randy. "I want Sam and Driscoll at least, and maybe others."
"Here they are now," said Jebs, and threw up his arms in a signal. "Hey, I found Randy."
They had come to the point at which the pathway to Tasman's joined the Blaze Trail. Sam's huge form with Driscoll's gray-capped head close at his elbow appeared there. At Jeb's hail, both paused and waited. In another few moments, Randy was repeating the story he had told to Jebs. "The important thing is that cowhide jacket I saw in the house," he finished. "It proves something, doesn't it?"
"Yes, it does," said Sam as he turned to lead the way home. "If there is a cowhide jacket, white with dark spots, that means a man to wear it. It means you saw something two-legged night before last, after all."
"You can leave the ifs out of it," said Randy. "I'll show you the jacket and something funny in the pocket of it. A sort of metal tube. Maybe a weapon or a special tool."
"Let's go now," urged Jebs eagerly. "4 of us ought to be able to tackle a whole nation of wild dogs."
"No, come along home," Sam overruled him. "We oughtn't to make that kind of a trip without a gun, and we haven't one in the house."
"How about Mr. Martin?"
suggested Driscoll.
"I've seen several shooting irons at his house."
"We'd better send for him to be in on this," approved Sam. Meanwhile, Randy must be feeling hungry.
As Sam spoke those words, Randy realized how true they were. "The last time I felt hungry or thirsty, it was about 2 o'clock, and I was up on the roof," he said as they walked along. "Then a bunch of things happened and took my mind off my appetite."
"You mean throwing the wasp at the dogs?" said Jebs. "That was a smart caper, almost smart enough for me to think of."
"Well, it's 4 o'clock now," said Randy, glancing at the watch on his wrist. "And now that Sam has mentioned it, I could eat 2 helpings of everything you happen to have."
"Come on and do it," said Sam, quickening his great strides. "Meanwhile, Driscoll can hop up in the Jeep and head for Martin's."
Rebel greeted them at New Chimney Pot House. Randy ate heartily, answering Sam's and Jeb's questions, enlarging on the story he had already told.
"Now then, about that spotted coat," said Sam, refilling Randy's plate. "Where did you leave it?"
"Right where I found it, on a shelf inside the house."
"I want that coat for a clue," said the giant. "Remember, I'm a deputy sheriff now."
Randy finished his food and washed his dishes, then he sought out a new shirt and took his spear apart. He put the knife in his pocket and threaded the thong back into his moccasin. As he finished, the Jeep rolled into the front yard. Driscoll and Mr. Martin got out. Under the farmer's arm were a handsome shotgun and a light sporting rifle.
"I had trouble restraining my boy Lee from coming along on this dog hunt," said Mr. Martin as he entered the house. "Jebs, ever since you showed him those trick effects with his electrical train, he thinks you're the greatest North Carolinian since James K. Polk." "What we're going to do," explained Sam, "is pay a visit to that house where Randy stirred up so much excitement."
"Driscoll told me what a time you had of it, son," said Mr. Martin to Randy. "If you're tired, better stay here and keep the place for us while we're gone." But Randy shook his head. "This late dinner put me into shape. I won't stay away from that house if you're going."
"Then we'll leave Rebel here to run things," said Sam.
"I'll keep the shotgun," announced Mr. Martin. "Who takes the rifle? You, Sam?"
"I doubt if my finger would fit inside the trigger guard," demurred Sam, grinning in his beard. "Let Driscoll have it. I've seen him handle firearms once or twice. He can be trusted with a gun."
So saying, Sam picked up the wooden bludgeon he had carried against the dogs 2 nights before. Driscoll was loading shells into the rifle's magazine. With his gray cap and stern face, he looked like a boy soldier of the Confederacy.
"Who wants my machete?"
he asked.
"It ought to be handy against a wild dog charge."
"Let me have it," said Randy, hurrying to draw it from where it hung. Jebs found his knotted club again.
"Lead the way, Randy,"
directed Sam. Randy found his heart beating fast again as he stepped out to head the party. Behind him, side by side, walked Mr. Martin and Driscoll, each with his gun carried in the position that the Army calls high port. Then came Jebs, the club ready in his hand, and huge Sam Cohill brought up the rear with his long, heavy staff.
"Hadn't we better speed up and reach that mystery joint before it gets dark?" spoke up Jebs more to break the silence than otherwise.
"Oh, we have plenty of time," Sam told him. "It's not past 5, and we're nearly at the longest day of the year. We can count on a long time till sunset."
"Better than 2 hours," added Driscoll. "The sun will go down about 7:30. "How do you call the time so close?" exploded Jebs. "Have you been holding a stopwatch on it?" "I just happen to read the almanac now and then," Driscoll answered. "It gives the time of sunrise and sunset for every day in the year."
It wasn't exactly a joke, but everybody laughed and felt less tense. "I can explain one of those mysteries that Driscoll passed on to me," offered Mr. Martin. "It was something about an orchard of sassafras trees."
"That's right," said Randy from his lead position. "It looked downright creepy. Those trees grew in regular rows. Somebody must have done a lot of figuring and then a lot of work to put them in just right. But why would anybody plant a sassafras orchard?"
"It was a peach orchard," replied the farmer.
"Peach orchard?" echoed Randy, more mystified than ever. "But it was sassafras, I tell you. No peach ever grows those funny leaves of different shapes and—"
"Oh, it may be sassafras now, but it was peach to start with." Mr. Martin chuckled. "Don't stare back at me so wide-eyed, son. Keep your eyes front, and I'll explain what I mean."
"Do that thing, Mr. Martin," begged Jebs. "If it's a riddle, we'll try it on the next greenhorn we see. If it's a ghost story, we can pass it along to Willie Dubbin. Hey, why isn't Willie here?"
"I asked him to come along," said Mr. Martin, "but he out-and-out refused to have anything to do with hunting wild dogs. He's a good worker, but he's not what you call eager for danger. But what I said just now isn't a riddle or a fairy story. It's just a matter of orchard-growing science. What's the word I want?"
"Horticulture?" suggested Randy.
Yes. Now, when you set out an orchard of young peach shoots, sometimes you do some grafting. Know what grafting is? The orchard kind, not the racketeer kind."
"You mean when a shoot of one tree is set to grow in the root of another?" said Driscoll.
"That's it. Well, to make sure of a good, strong growth for peach trees, sometimes slips of peach are grafted into extra strong growing roots of another tree. That gives the peach a good start right off. I'm no peach farmer myself, but I've seen it done here and there, sometimes by grafting to persimmon and sometimes to sassafras. Both of those trees put down roots that die about as hard as any living thing."
"I can guarantee that," said Jebs. "I've helped grub up sassafras roots, and it's rugged work."
"Now," resumed Mr. Martin, "what happened to that orchard Randy found was the farmer walked off and left it and never cared for it again. The peach trees that grew up from those root grafts just purely died away, but the sassafras roots sent their own new stems busting up out of the ground into trees of their own kind. And there you are."
"You spoil what might have been a good spooky mystery," Jebs half complained.
"Who might have put in that peach orchard?" Sam asked Mr. Martin. "I can't rightly say. I know there was some farming done in that part of the woods, maybe 20 years back, but nobody worked the place for very long." "Because of that old lawsuit we heard about," agreed the giant. Randy pointed up ahead with the machete.
"Look, are we going to have some more rain? I see a sort of cloud." "And it's rolling and heaving," chimed in Jebs from his rear position. "I hope it isn't a whirlwind."
"No, it's smoke," said Mr. Martin. "It's a fire in the woods." They quickened their pace.
"It looks as if it's right where that house is," said Randy.
"Right, Randy," said Sam Cohill from his greater height. "I see something. Some kind of clearing."
"Then the deserted house is afire," cried Randy. "Who started it?"
End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13. The Evidence Burns. Randy froze in his tracks, gazing. Mr. Martin and Driscoll, also stopping, looked over his shoulders. Behind them waited Jebs and Sam. So, for a breath's space, the whole quintet paused in motionless perplexity. But only for a second. Then Randy dug in his toes and threw himself forward. He galloped toward the burning house as instantly and swiftly as 2 hours before he had fled away from it. "Hold it, Randy!" cried Mr. Martin from behind. "Don't break up the formation like that!" But Randy did not wait. He did not even falter. His feet only flew the faster. His shirt tail, loose from his waistband, streamed behind him like a banner in the wind of his own making. "Wait, Randy, wait!" That was Sam Cohill. Still, Randy gave no indication that he would slow his furious pace. He outdistanced the hastening feet of his companions, drawing far ahead of them. He burst through the final belt of trees and paused only on the edge of the old clearing. He looked at the burning house. Through gaps in the dry old shingles of the roof licked and quivered tongues of bright flame. Smoke billowed from broken windows, from the remains of the stovepipe. Randy broke into a run again, heading for the door. As he came near, skirting the edge of the sassafras orchard, he could see that the door had been pulled shut. He remembered that the wild dogs had clawed it wide open to come in after him. Who had closed it again? Surely not the dogs. Fairly leaping the last few paces, Randy caught at the door and wrenched it open. A mighty blast of smoke, hot as fire and choking as water, smote him. He fell back half a dozen steps as though he had been forcibly shoved. Squinting with his tear-filled eyes, he looked into the house. The floor blazed in several places. The whole interior was full of smoke. "Don't go in there, Randy!" roared Sam Cohill, his voice drawing closer. "I've got to," gasped Randy. He dropped Driscoll's machete and bored in through the smoke toward the door, an arm lifted to shield his face. Then he felt the smashing impact of a hard, heavy body. Something clutched his knees together like a noose of a tight-drawn cable. He fell, hard and flat, upon the ground. Somebody or something sprawled its full weight upon him, and hands caught his shoulders.
"What are you trying to do?"
choked Jebs from among the wisps of smoke.
"If I'd missed that tackle, you'd have gone right in there to be barbecued."
"Let go, Jebs," commanded Randy, struggling against his friend's clutch. "That cowhide coat's in there. Sam needs it for a clue."
"No, stay out of there!" The giant had run up to them. His enormous hand caught Randy, lifting him from the ground and carrying him away from the smoke-gushing doorway as lightly as though he were a kitten. "We can spare that coat and whatever evidence it might give better than we can spare you."
"And that's the truth,"
vowed Jebs, choking and wheezing from the smoke he had swallowed. "Stay clear," ordered Sam Cohill, his hand still gripping Randy like a pair of tongs. "Don't go near that door, Randy. Understand? Do you agree, or do I have to sit on you?"
"Whatever you say, Sam," conceded Randy. "I guess I lost my head when I saw the place was burning up."
Releasing Randy, Sam moved closer to the door, tried to peer through the gush of black smoke. Flames darted in and out of the murk. Stooping, the giant possessed himself of the machete that Randy had dropped. Then he strode around the side of the house, keeping a respectful distance from the flames that snapped from windows and walls.
"What's Sam doing with my machete?"
inquired Driscoll, joining Randy and Jebs. "I think he wants to mow away some of the brush near the house," said Mr. Martin. "It'd be right hard to set these woods on fire, but it's smart to keep the fire to the house itself."
"I'll help, Sam,"
said Randy, following the giant.
"And I'll help you,"
announced Jebs, quickly falling into step with Randy.
"I don't want you to get too far away from me. I might have to tackle you again."
At the side and rear of the house, a sizable thicket of brushy young saplings grew almost against the timber walls. Here Sam Cohill had set to work, with great reaping slashes of the machete. The stems and branches fell before his mighty onslaught, and with his other big hand he yanked smaller bushes up by their roots. Swiftly, Jebs and Randy began to gather up armfuls of the felled and uprooted brush, dragging their burdens back away from the house. "That's good," said Sam, glancing up from his work. "Work fast before the fire comes through the walls." He chopped away. "Inside job all right," he added.
"How do you figure that?"
said Jebs, speaking through a heaped burden of leafage. "Tell you later," said Sam, hacking into a fresh clump of shrubbery. Like demons they worked, sweating with the heat and coughing when clouds of smoke reached them from the house. The work was furious, but it did not take them long. Indeed, they could not afford to spend long at clearing the brush back from the house. Even as they moved away with the final bundles of green foliage, they saw flames bursting triumphantly through the scorched and blackened panels of the rear door. "That's what I meant by an inside job," said Sam to Jebs. "The fire must have been started inside the house. The doors were closed, remember? And it's had a hard time struggling out here into the open, unless Randy himself dropped a match in there."
"I didn't even have a match," said Randy.
Just then Driscoll wheeled around and stared fixedly through the trees toward the far end of the sassafras orchard. Then he snatched the rifle from where he had leaned it against the sycamore.
"I hear somebody," he said,
and moved rapidly away past the burning house. Jebs immediately hastened after Driscoll and Randy after Jebs. Ahead of them, Driscoll broke into a run. Near the thicker woods, he stopped and brought the rifle to his shoulder.
"Come out of there," he called sternly. "Come out or I'll let you have a bullet."
"Now, you just point that there gun somewheres else," drawled a plaintive voice, "and I'll come out."
From among the trees moved Mr. Martin's hired man, his eyes wide and frightened as they looked at Driscoll's weapon. One of Willie Dubbin's hands was fastened in the headstall of the mule he had used in plowing at New Chimney Pot House.
"Don't shoot," he begged. "I ain't heard of no open season on folks."
Driscoll lowered the rifle but kept finger on trigger.
"What are you doing here?"
"Willie," cried Mr. Martin, who had followed the boys, "I thought you'd stayed at home. I thought you were scared of those wild dogs."
"Yes, sir, that's about it,"
said Willie apologetically.
"But after you took out with Driscoll here, and carried your both guns with you, I felt so almighty worried and jumpy I figured I'd better try to catch up with you. So I hopped on Old Mule here and rode after y'all."
Driscoll smiled at the hired man's explanation and set the butt of the rifle to the ground. Randy, however, looked at Willie sharply.
"First you were afraid to come," he said. "Then you headed through the woods by yourself. How'd you get the nerve to do that?" "Oh, I didn't relish it none, but I didn't have the nerve to stay either," said Willie. "So I come along, and then I didn't see no sign of you all at New Chimney Pot."
"How'd you know we were here?" interrupted Sam. "How did you find us?"
"Why, it ain't me found you," said Willie, scratching his lean chin with his thumb. "It was Old Mule. Shucks, I just got back on him and let him take his own way of finding you. Old Mule can find his way to wherever Mr. Martin's at, good as any hound dog."
Willie's eyes traveled to where the house blazed.
"Say, folks, who done that? Who set fire to the house yonder? Looks as hot as a stove oven."
"I was going to ask you if you knew anything about it," Sam told him deeply.
"Why, I be dogged," cried Willie, and turned toward the mule as though to subpoena him as a witness. "It's all a guess to me. I never even heard of this here place before, let alone knowed about it. Who owns it? What happened?"
Randy looked at Willie and at the mule. Had that long-eared beast truly found the trail of its master and come here unprompted and unguided? He had heard of mules that could and did follow their owners along unfamiliar trails. Certainly the present specimen looked wise and cunning. Perhaps it looked wise because Willie stood beside it looking so baffled.
"I wonder," muttered Jebs at Randy's ear, "if we aren't looking right spang at Mr. Two-Legs, the character that wore the spotted cowskin to do his midnight strolling with the wild dogs. Wish we'd saved that coat to see if it fit Willie."
Randy had been thinking the same thing. "One clue can't burn up in there," he whispered back. "That metal thing in the pocket of the coat. We can comb it out of the ashes." "Since you're here, Mr. Martin said to Willie. "Tie the mule to that tree beside you and help us. We're going to have to keep watch on this fire until it's burned down right much. Then we'll all go back to New Chimney Pot."
"Whatever you say," assented Willie. "Anyways, it don't look like as if you have long to wait before that's all burnt away."
As he spoke, the roof tree collapsed with a heavy crashing boom, and the fire bounded upward through the opening. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. Again Darkness. But the burning of the house took hours. The sun had set. The hands of Randy's watch stood at 10 minutes after 8, and all the watchers around the flames were weary and hungry by the time the final collapse of logs and timbers made a mere glowing heap like a big council fire. About that time Mr. Martin glanced up and wiped his face. "I felt a drop of rain," he announced. "I reckon we're in for another shower. It'll be good for the crops." "And good for us, too," said Sam. "A hard rain will put out the last of the fire, and maybe it'll keep the dogs at home, too."
Speaking of that, where is their home? Asked Driscoll. Did they den up here?
No, not from what Randy said about the place, replied Sam. He made it sound like a deserted cabin, not a lair or kennel. My hunch, and it's only a hunch, was that this house we've seen burned down was more like a sort of rallying point for the pack.
You make them sound human, said Driscoll. Organized and disciplined. Well, aren't they? Threw in Jebs. Don't they run these night maneuvers like soldiers raiding an enemy position? Didn't they gang up on Randy like a patrol after a prisoner? Sure they sound human. They act human. I've been arguing you all that point, drawled Willie Dubbin. I've been saying all the time there's more than dog sense among 'em. That there jacket Randy says he seen in there, that's proof. One dog can change into a man and back again. Like the werewolves Mr. Tasman told us about, said Jebs. Let's get back away from here, pleaded Willie. I don't relish this place.
Amid the increasing scatter of raindrops, the party turned toward the homeward trail. Both Driscoll and Sam had brought flashlights along, and with these they moved ahead to search out the line of blazed trees in the dark. Willie Dubbin led the mule behind them, and Jebs walked at Willie's side. Mr. Martin and Randy, following closely, could hear their conversation.
You figure I'm right, boy?
Willie was saying.
Why, dog my soul, I pure down know I'm right. I figured it all out from what I've been hearing since I was a young chap. No more than walking around with my ears flopping. That there spotted bugler dog. Well, Randy allows he was sort of tyrannizing around, running the show.
He certainly was, agreed Randy from the rear of the procession.
Now, that there jacket must have been his jacket, amplified Willie solemnly. He could put it on at night and it'd turn him into a man, or anyway something like a man. Walk around on 2 feet. May be able to use his front paws like they was sure enough hands.
That's not the way I heard about werewolves, boomed back Sam in humor with Willie's superstitious avowals. It was more the other way around. The old tale says a werewolf is a man by day and an animal by night. How can science prove what you're saying?
Shucks, Mr. Cohill, answered Willie. Science don't hold none with them tales, so it don't study to prove nothing about 'em. And it don't seem no harder for a daytime man to turn into a nighttime wolf than for a daytime dog to turn into a nighttime man, am I right?
Right enough, according to logic, agreed Sam, trying not to laugh.
Well, things does change, Willie pursued his argument. Look at a little bitty tadpole, a fish sort of like. Then it forgets its tail and reaches out arms and legs and turns into a frog. Or a caterpillar worm all at once puts out wings and flops around for a butterfly. They take a longer time at it, but otherwise ain't that just as hard to do as a dog turning into a man?
Let me take you into the woods to talk to Mr. Hobart Tasman sometime, suggested Randy. He's read a book about werewolves. He'll tell you about cases on the records of real courts.
Listen here, sonny, said Willie. I ain't going any deeper into these here woods to listen to nothing. I've had my bait of them kind of tales.
But what if Bugler's coat burned up in the house? Asked Randy. He can't make the change.
Oh, more'n likely he snaked in and carried his coat out first, was Willie's ready theory. Or like enough he slipped it on by daytime this once and turned into his man shape so he could set the fire.
We certainly don't know how the fire started, said Mr. Martin, turning his shotgun muzzle downward to keep rain from entering. Randy had nothing to do with it, and the dogs couldn't have done it.
Not without one or other of 'em turning into a man, said Willie, humorlessly stubborn in his belief. However could a dog strike a match without he had him some hands? Maybe those wasp stings burned them up so bad they touched off the house by spontaneous combustion, offered Jebs. Nobody laughed.
How about your Indian friends, Sam? Asked Mr. Martin, raising his voice. Might they have mixed into this? Not for a moment, said Sam at once. I've known the Drowning Creek Indians for years. They've been my best friends, my only friends, until Driscoll and these other boys showed up. And you always know where you stand with an Indian, friend or foe. He won't two-time a real friend for anything. Neither will a dog, agreed Mr. Martin. I'm not too happy about dogs just now, said Randy. Mr. Martin laughed understandingly. Look at it without feeling too mad at them, Randy. What if you owned some dogs and they caught a stranger fooling around with some house of yours? Wouldn't you expect them to try to run the stranger off the way they tried with you?
Yes, but the house was deserted, and I didn't mean any harm.
Well, you can't expect dogs to know that. They figured on you as a trespasser. Wetly, the party slogged along until it reached New Chimney Pot. The rain fell more heavily still as they entered. Jeb and Driscoll kindled a fire on the hearth and hurried out with flashlights to feed the stock while Sam fried ham and potatoes. Everyone ate heartily under the glow of the new electric lights.
"I'll drive you home, Mr. Martin," said Driscoll as they finished. "It'll be wet going in that open Jeep, but maybe Randy or Jebs will lend you a raincoat." "You can have mine, Mr. Martin. It's pretty big," offered Jebs. "Randy, probably Willie will thank you for the loan of your coat while he rides the mule home." "I ain't riding old mule anywheres alone in this night," declared Willie, so warmly that he speeded up out of his drawl. "I've done tied him up in your calf shed. I'm going in the Jeep. There ain't money enough in North Carolina and in South Carolina on top of it to get me riding through these woods tonight with nobody but old mule for company." "All right, go with Driscoll and Mr. Martin," said Jebs. "I'll ride old mule over myself in the morning, if it's cleared up and he'll let me stay on his back." Mr. Martin and Willie, clad in the borrowed raincoats, went out with Driscoll to start the Jeep and drive away. Randy went into the front room. The small fire on the hearth was dispelling dampness from the air and from his clothing, and he was glad to sit down. He felt tired and grateful for shelter. Rebel came and sat beside him. "Sam," said Jebs, as he and the giant entered in turn, "what do you as a special deputy think of the evidence so far?"
"As a special deputy, I don't think there is very much evidence," replied Sam, pulling up his big chair. "What there is had better be pretty well puzzled over before anybody gives an opinion."
"How about you, Randy?" was Jeb's next question. "Or are you back at your hobby of thinking?"
Mr. Martin made one remark that sticks in my mind," Randy told them, "about the dogs acting as if I was a trespasser."
"Yeah," said Jebs. "They must have thought they were doing their duty, just the way Rebs would do his if anybody tried to bust in here at New Chimney Pot."
"But I've told you," went on Randy, "that place didn't look lived in by dogs or men." "You keep talking as if those dogs acted like pretty smart animals," observed Sam.
"And they did act smart," Randy nodded. "Especially that spotted one, Bugler. And all of 'em meant business, taking after me. The only one that seemed downright mean, though, was that wolfish mongrel with the bushy tail."
"I don't expect we'll have much trouble with them tonight," Sam said. "The rain's falling faster all the time, and it won't be the sort of weather dogs like to face. Some of them will be doctoring their wasp stings, too." Jeb laughed.
"I'd like to have been where I could have seen and heard that wasp business," he said. "Of course, I'd want to be somewhere safe myself from wasps and dogs both."
Randy leaned back.
"Well, those wasps were out and out disgusted," he remembered. "They showed it, too, the best way they knew how. I estimated that there were about 30 of them, and every single wasp must have picked out a dog to sit down on." "How do you feel about all this whooping and hollering?" asked Jebs, eyeing his friend calculatingly.
"Oh, slightly bushed," said Randy, "and thoroughly thankful. That ought to answer your question."
"Oh, it does, said Jebs. "But me, I'm all broke out with a heap of other questions, and nobody knows the answers, I'll bet. Except maybe the dogs themselves. We'll have to sit around here and guess on them till the dogs decide to talk up or somebody talks up for them. The main question, of course,
is who or what started the fire," Sam finished for him. Randy sat up and stared at the giant, but Jebs only grinned.
"Sam isn't a mind reader, Randy. It's just that he's studying along the same lines as we are. Out yonder in the rain, I felt halfway like going along with Willie Dubbin's thrilling tale about dogs turning back and forth into something almost human."
"I know what you mean," said Randy. He made it sound almost sensible.
"But here," continued Jebs, "with our brand new electric lights blazing away—"
"In here," Sam interrupted again, "you get back your common sense and wonder how much Willie believes his own arguments."
"His own arguments?" repeated Randy. "Hear that echo?" said Jebs to Sam. "You ought to change the name of New Chimney Pot to Echo in the Valley."
"It's just what Jeb says, Randy," grinned Sam. "He and I are trying to study the case along the same lines."
"And you think," said Randy after a moment, "that Willie may be faking that werewolf story idea to cover up." "Randy learns fast, Sam," commented Jebs dryly. You reckon this special deputy stuff is catching? Or is it just the natural Randy Hunter genius for digging up what looks silly and making it look sensible? I've seen him work before, you know.
Nobody can accuse Willie on mere guesses, Sam warned the boys. Let's understand that before we go on. But we've all been thinking about how odd it was that he showed up at the burning house.
That's the truth, cried Jebs. And it's double odd because when Driscoll and I were at Mr. Martin's, Willie swore up and down and crossways on the bias that he was too scared to come with us. Might Willie be running with the dogs? Randy voiced the thought of them all.
It doesn't seem logical, said Sam.
Then he's the one, decided Jebs. You know the mystery books. The least suspicious guy turns out to be guilty. Another thing about mysteries, it's apt to be the butler. Willie's no butler, but he works for Mr. Martin. That's as close to a butler as we got on this case.
Randy got up, found pencil and paper, and sat down again.
Shall we make notes to mull over later? He suggested.
All right, granted Sam. But I'll be keeping 'em after they're made, and remember, no going off half-cocked on any wild guesses. All right, after Willie, who's our next suspect?
We can't put down Mr. Martin, said Jebs, because he was with us a right long time before we even came close to the house and found it burning. And before that, Driscoll drove clear to his farm to get him. He couldn't be in two places at once.
There's Hobart Tasman, mused Sam.
You might as well write down Bugler, said Randy. Jeb saw me test his blindness by shoving a book at his face. He didn't see. He never even blinked. I know he's not faking.
Beyond those, there's my bunch of Indian friends, resumed Sam. As I told James Martin, I'd stake my life on their being square with us. That brings us to Mr. X.
Who's he? Asked Randy, looking up from his notes.
Mr. X, the unknown quantity, said Sam, acting in secret for secret reasons none of us can figure out. But Mr. X is a sort of genius. He has the friendship and obedience of those wild dogs.
Then they aren't wild, objected Jebs.
No, they aren't. They're a pack of well-trained, well-disciplined hunting animals. They operate at the wish and direction of Mr. X and his spotted jacket.
Which either was or wasn't burned up in the fire, reminded Jebs. How can we find out? I told you how, said Randy. In the jacket pocket was that mysterious metal tube. If we find it in the ashes, the jacket burned up.
We'll have to wait a day or two until the ashes are cool enough to examine, said Sam. Meanwhile, all we need to do is figure out who Mr. X is. They were still discussing, arguing, and jotting notes when Driscoll came home. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. Jebs is Mysterious. But again the rain had ceased before dawn, and the sun rose in bright splendor over green thickets. Randy rose early enough to help Sam Cohill start breakfast, then went out to scatter grain to the chickens. He looked for evidence of a prowling visit from the wild dogs, and with satisfaction he saw that all was well.
No casualties on our side so far,
called Driscoll from the pig pen where he was pouring a bucket of mash into the trough.
You've been the closest to danger so far, Randy, and you got off without a scratch yesterday. Left the enemy with one wounded soldier, too, that wolf dog you speared.
Don't forget the others that were speared by my little partisan rangers, the wasps, laughed Randy.
Too bad we can't have the wasps fighting on our side all the time, spoke up Jebs.
He had led Willie Dubbin's friend the mule into the open, and was offering him an ear of corn. Judiciously the mule eyed the skiff, sniffed at it, and finally caught it by the end in his teeth and slowly ate it, cob and all.
I'll ride him back to Martin's as soon as I've had a bite of breakfast, announced Jebs. You don't reckon he's like the mules in the funny papers, do you? He won't buck me off or anything.
Well, if Willie could ride him, you ought to be able to, said Randy.
Maybe he and Willie are members of the Mule Brotherhood together, said Jebs. Well, I'll give it a try. He won't be the first mule I hopped onto, and if he sets me off again, he won't be the first mule to do that either. Why, gentlemen, I've had mules flip me so high in the air that the jaybirds could have built nests in all my pockets.
I love that homespun humor Jebs is always whipping up for us, said Randy to Driscoll. But I'm not laughing just now. I remembered what he said a moment ago. Too bad we don't have the wasps on our side.
Something tells me that if it stays clear tonight, and the sky looks mighty empty of clouds right now, we'll see our wild dogs dropping in for a visit. They've stayed away 2 nights, and I doubt if they'll neglect us any longer."
"Hey," said Jebs, "how's about some breakfast now, and after a while somebody come over to Martin's with the jeep to carry me back?"
Breakfast over, Jebs mounted the mule and headed off across the rough bridge to the woodland trail beyond. Despite his apprehensions, the long-eared beast accepted his weight cheerfully. Driscoll and Randy examined the water wheel and the generator in its snug little quarters. The dam looked solid and sturdy, but the two worked a few minutes, adding some final touches for strength and efficiency. Sam came and loomed over them, grinning.
"I think you like that dam and the electric plant all the better because we ourselves got it running," he declared.
"Let's make sure it keeps running," said Driscoll.
"Amen to that," said Sam. "We aren't going to throw away any kerosene lamps or stoves, and I want to start improving on the little I know about electrical repairs, too. I have to send off for a book on wiring. I wonder if a man can take a correspondence course in electrical mechanics."
"Ask Lyman Hager over in Wagram," said Driscoll. "Or ask Jebs Markham. Jebs is right deep in stuff like that. Speaking of Jebs, I'm going to drive over for him in an hour or so. Want to go with me, Randy?"
"No, I want to go visit Hobart Tasman."
"Mud and all?"
inquired Sam, surprised. "Mud and all," said Randy. "I don't feel right with him alone and helpless. If he doesn't worry about wild dogs, I do."
"Well, don't go wandering off into a new ambush," warned Driscoll.
"That's right," said Sam. "Stick to the trail from here to Tasman's place, and stick to it when you come back."
"But don't stick too tight," Driscoll put in a new warning. "We don't want to have to come and gouge you out of the mire."
"I promise," said Randy, and went to fetch a stick and the book about lives of the hunted. A second night of rain had made the way muddier and marshier than ever, but Randy had expected that. He paused beside the first puddle, took off his moccasins, and rolled up the legs of his dungarees. Then he waded into the mud and water. At some points it was shin-deep, and he groped ahead with the end of his stick to test the footing under the brown surface. Coming up on fairly firm ground near the clearing, he put on his moccasins again and approached the yard of Hobart Tasman. He saw the slender figure of the clay potter sitting on the cabin doorstep. "Good morning, Mr. Tasman," called Randy. "It's Randy Hunter."
"All alone today, are you?"
replied Tasman, his sightless eyes seeming to stare.
"What do you want?"
"I came to read to you again," Randy told him. "I brought Lives of the Hunted."
"What happened to you yesterday?" demanded Tasman. "Your friends all came poking and fussing around here looking for you. I told them you hadn't been here, but I'm not sure they believed me."
The lean brows drew together.
"I think they suspected me of hiding you away somewhere. I've been wondering what happened to you."
So saying, Tasman leaned against the door jamb. "It's a long story and a peculiar one," Randy informed him. "I was trapped up on the roof of a deserted house by those wild dogs."
"Trapped?"
echoed Tasman sharply.
"Wild dogs?"
Randy related his adventure. The blind man listened with the utmost attention. He sniffed when Randy described his makeshift weapon of wasps in the joint of stovepipe, and cocked his head sidewise in an attitude of deep thought at the incident of Randy's spear fight with the wolfish dog.
"Does it occur to you," said Tasman at length, "that you're mighty lucky to be in one piece today?"
"It certainly does occur to me," Randy assured him. "It occurs to me over and over. I don't want to go through anything like that again. And I can't understand why you're willing to stay out here all alone without any defense if those dogs should try to raid you."
"Oh, they couldn't catch me off guard," Tasman said with a thin smile. "I could hear them coming far away. I could hear a snake crawling around this house. Any dogs that tried to rush me here would find my door slammed and barred against them. I'd hear them coming, and I'd wait until I heard them go away again."
"Why don't you come to New Chimney Pot?" urged Randy. "There wouldn't be any danger there, and Driscoll and Sam would be glad to have you, help you in any way."
"No thanks," Tasman cut him off emphatically. "I want to live by myself the best way I can, without help from anyone. Now, which story did you think you'd read me?"
Feeling rebuffed, Randy sat on a rock near the doorway and opened the book. He read for some time, then looked at his watch. "It's nearly noon," he said.
"Yes," agreed Tasman. "I feel the heat of the sun. It's climbing toward the top of the sky."
His upturned, sightless face was lighted by the sun's rays.
"Well, Randy, thanks for reading to me, but let's get back to what we were talking about before."
"The wild dogs?" asked Randy. He was surprised that Tasman should reopen a subject he had closed so abruptly.
Yes, I'm not worried about 'em, but you are. You had a narrow escape. I'm surprised you don't go home and clear away from these woods.
Jeb and I came to help Driscoll and Sam, said Randy. We're helping them make a real home at New Chimney Pot.
A home for Driscoll Jordan and that big hulking giant?
Randy pretended to ignore the slur on Sam's size. Well, Driscoll's ancestors owned this land more than a century ago, he said. Driscoll feels at home on it. He'll go to college. He and Jebs and I plan to be at the state university together. But between school terms, he'll help Sam make a profitable property here in these woods.
He'll cut the trees,
said Tasman fiercely. He won't destroy the woods, Randy assured him. He'll leave the young trees to grow bigger for the future. I've seen his government bulletins on how to set up a sensible lumbering project.
The place'll swarm with lumberjacks, Tasman said. I've seen them chopping down whole mountain forests.
He was still gloomy as Randy headed home for dinner. Even as Randy reached the backyard of New Chimney Pot House, he saw the Jeep drawing up in front. He walked around the side of the house to greet Driscoll and Jebs.
I had a quiet little council with Mr. Martin,
announced Driscoll.
He slipped his 2 guns into our Jeep. Later on, sometime before sundown, he'll stroll quietly over here for supper.
All 3 miles?
Sure. You think he's one of those soft town-raised folks who can't even walk to the street corner without getting tired? Anyway, he and Sam and I all think the dogs will come looking for food and trouble tonight. Mr. Martin won't tell Willie where he's going, and after supper he'll stay all night. We hope to have a showdown with our night-running pals.
And with their night-running friend, the one with 2 feet, elaborated Jebs, getting out of the Jeep. Under one arm he lugged the rifle and shotgun. His other hand clutched something dark and cubical from which trailed wires. What's that gimmick? Randy asked him. A bomb or a portable radio? I borrowed it from Mr. Martin's kid, Lee. Jeb held out the wire-festooned cube. It was about the size of half a brick and made of dark, hard rubber. Its top was furnished with a metal band on which were spaced figures as on a gauge, and a short pivoted lever. It looks like a transformer from an electric train set, ventured Randy. Maybe because that's what it is, said Jebs, and his square, rosy face took on an expression of mysterious cunning.
Is Jebs going into his second childhood?
Driscoll said.
Shoo,
cried Jebs.
Maybe I'm still in my first childhood. If you're going to stand around making cracks, I won't let you in on my double-jointed new mechanical triumph. But about this time tomorrow, you'll all be bragging on it.
He walked into the house with the guns and the transformer. Randy and Driscoll followed him, smiling but wondering. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. LibriVox recordings in the public domain. Chapter 16. Showdown. Jebs laid Mr. Martin's 2 borrowed guns carefully on the sofa in the front room. Then he visited Sam's stock of tools and helped himself to a strong pair of wire nippers. Still quietly grinning, he went outside to the calf shed, and from it lugged forth a roll of heavy wire netting left over from building the chicken run.
What's that?
Driscoll asked him.
Just don't worry your mind about this,
said Jeff loftily.
I want the full splendor of the thing to bust out on you later.
He set the roll of netting down. He walked to the stockaded pig pen, viewed it with the eye of an expert calculator, then carefully paced off its length and width. Finally, he returned to the netting, unrolled several yards of it, and carefully flattened it out. Weighting it here and there with stones, he paced off a certain expanse, and finally knelt and began to cut across the mesh with the nippers.
Do you think we ought to get a doctor to examine his head?
ventured Driscoll to Randy.
Have your fun, said Jebs loftily. Every great inventor gets laughed at by the rabble. Afterwards, they come and want to invest their money in his big scheme.
He straightened out more wire, paced off a new section, and cut this as well. Rebel, strolling out, sniffed at the wire and the nippers.
You aren't laughing at me, are you, boy? Jebs addressed the terrier. Dogs have better manners than human beings. Sometimes they have better sense, too.
Rebel acts as if he guessed what you're up to, observed Sam walking through the yard.
Do you guess?
Challenged Jebs quickly. I think I do, Jebs, and I'll go along with your scheme. Keep hacking away at that wire. It's a real inspiration. Let's clear of all these people, Randy said to Driscoll. We might catch whatever ails them. Still, Jebs refused to reveal his plan. When he had provided himself with 4 big rectangles of the wire netting, he dragged them into position around the pig pen. Aren't you going to put them straight up and down? Asked Randy, more puzzled than ever. Rebel, Jeb solemnly addressed the watching bull-terrier, the ignorance of these unscientific busybodies would be refreshing if they didn't have so much of it in stock. Sam had come out of his house again, his long arms carrying a stack of newspapers. You'll be better off with some of these under your wire, he suggested. The ground's still damp, you know. That's the truth, Jebs approved heartily. Quickly he pulled his oblongs of netting away from the sty once more. Then, helping himself to the papers, he opened them up and laid them down in great areas next to the stockade, several thicknesses deep. Finally he arranged the netting upon them in its former position, and fetched rocks as before to weigh them flat. That'll do, he decided at last. Now then, you folks who don't know how to tell a genius when you bump smack into him, do me just one favor. Don't stamp around on top of this wire, get it out of position, here? Oh, we wouldn't dream of it, vowed Randy solemnly. He and Driscoll walked away with an elaborate display of bored indifference. They visited the various approaches from the woods to the yard. Shall we try to set those traps again? Suggested Randy. Driscoll shook his gray-capped head. I doubt if it would do much good. Remember how Mr. X slipped ahead of his pack to spring the traps before? I'm convinced he did it, not the dogs, and he'll figure on doing the same job when he comes here again. If we could only ambush them some way, began Randy. But we can't, said Driscoll. They'd smell out anybody lurking around outside for 'em. Whatever plan of battle we make had better wait for Mr. Martin anyway. He'll want to sit in on the powwow. At 5 o'clock, Mr. Martin strolled into the yard. Under his arm he carried a bulging bag of heavy brown paper. Hey, he greeted the residents of the new chimney pot house. I hope you all haven't started to cook supper yet. Since I invited myself, I brought something along. What is it? Asked Jebs. Stuff to eat's always welcome. I'll bring it in and show it to you. In the kitchen he opened the bag. From it he produced a small plump bird, ready, plucked, and dressed. He laid another on the table, another, and another. One apiece, he announced, emptying the bag. And 2 for Sam here, he needs extra cargo. Quail, whooped Driscoll. Where'd you get quail this time of year, Mr. Martin? Oh, I didn't do any hunting out of season, smiled the farmer. I knocked these over Thanksgiving last fall. I picked and cleaned them, and they've been waiting in the deep freeze ever since. When you and I got through talking this morning, I went and dug them out so they could thaw. The quail were fat and juicy looking. Their legs and wings had been trussed with bits of twine, as though they were midget turkeys. How do you cook quail? Asked Randy. Just leave that to me, said Sam in a deep voice of authority. Somebody get me a paper bag, smaller than the one Mr. Martin brought them in. He took a bowl and began to mix salt, pepper, and sifted flour. When Driscoll found the bag he wanted, Sam poured in the mixture, closed the mouth, and shook it briskly. Then he put in the quail, one at a time, shaking the bag and turning it over and over to dust each bird thoroughly. Meanwhile, a saucepan with butter in it stood heating on the stove. In this he browned the quail one by one as they emerged from the bag dusted with salt, pepper, and flour. Finally he assembled the browned plump birds in a large deep frying pan and poured 2 cups of water over them. This pan he set over a slow fire. Slow cookin's the secret, he commented. I've used this recipe lots of times, tossing up quail dinners for my Indian friends. Where did you learn to cook quail like that? Driscoll wanted to know. Is it an Indian way of cooking? Sam winked one big eye. Well, I got it out of an old newspaper, he said. The household hints section. The supper, when ready, also included stewed carrots, mustard greens, spring onions, hashed brown potatoes, and a shortcake topped with sliced bananas. Everyone did full and enthusiastic justice to all these things. I never ate anything better in all my born days, insisted Jebs, polishing a bone. I can't figure Rebel not panhandling us for some of it. I fed Rebel early to keep him from doing just that thing, explained Driscoll. When the dishes had been washed and put away, the whole party gathered in the front room to confer. All listened while Sam outlined a campaign, quickly and simply. We'll stay indoors, as quietly as we can with all the lights off, he said. If they come, it will probably be as soon as the darkness falls.
When we know they're on the place, we'll rush."
"When we know they're on the place," repeated Randy. "You think they'll make noise enough?" "I think they will," replied Jebs mysteriously.
"We have guns," went on Sam. "Let's load 'em. But we won't fire a shot unless we're right on top of something that needs shooting pretty badly."
Mr. Martin opened the breech of the shotgun and fed 2 shells into it.
"I'll carry this,"
he said, closing it again and leaning it against the side of the fireplace.
"The rifle," he went on, loading it in turn, "can go to Driscoll, the same as yesterday."
"Give it to Randy this time," spoke up Driscoll. "I'm going to stick to my old machete."
"What about Jebs?" asked Randy. "What's his weapon?" "Oh, just a simple secret one," said Jebs, elaborately casual. "Just a simple little special piece of armament that will be the dawn of a new era in warfare."
"How can just 5 of us round up 10 dogs?" asked Driscoll. "Randy said there were 10.
"We won't try to round them up," Sam said. "As a matter of fact, they'll probably scatter and run, the way they did before. What we want to do is get hold of Mr. X, the 2-legged member of the pack."
"I'm for that," agreed Driscoll. "But how do we go about getting hold of him?"
"We run him down. Don't bother with the dogs unless they come at you. Now, attention to orders."
It was already dim inside the front room. Sam looked around the group like a military commander checking his subordinates.
"We'll be waiting in the kitchen," he said. "Rebel will sense the coming of the pack and he'll give us our first warning. Everybody be quiet until I give the word, and then out we go. Just outside the door, we form a line at once. Randy will be at the right with the rifle, and Jim Martin here at the left with a shotgun. Driscoll and I hold positions between. Rebel comes along, of course."
"You're leaving Jebs out," objected Randy.
"Don't worry about me, I'll be in it,"
said Jebs, and walked into the bedroom he shared with Randy. They heard him cautiously raising the window.
"Does everybody understand?" wound up Sam. "Any questions? All right, it's set."
They fell quiet, sitting down and trying to relax. Time passed. The sun was setting. Inside, the house grew dark.
"It'll be dark in a few minutes,"
reported Driscoll, glancing out a front window. More silence. Randy sat with the rifle across his knees. He tried to keep from quivering with excitement. Then Rebel rose from his place by the hearth, his sharp eyes lifted, his stubby tail cocked. He growled softly. They could barely make out his pale outline. He was looking toward the rear of the house.
"Quiet, boy,"
warned Driscoll, barely whispering.
"Keep it to yourself. You'll get your chance in a moment."
Sam's body, rising to its full height, made a tremendous shadow in the room.
"Come on,"
he muttered, and led the way into the kitchen. His big feet moved as noiselessly as a cat's. They followed him and gathered. Randy had the rifle ready in his hands. Against his knee pressed Rebel. The bull terrier was obedient to Driscoll's order for silence, but Randy could feel him tremble, as if wildly eager for action. Close by on Randy's other side stood Mr. Martin with the shotgun, and beyond him was Driscoll with his machete. Sam had opened the kitchen door an inch or so, his big fingers hooked on its edge. Outside all was dark and quiet. Then, abruptly, noise seemed to tear the night to pieces. A whole chorus of animal voices burst into howling, deafening din, a many-throated cry of pain and terror. Sam whipped the door open. They all rushed out. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. Victory. As Randy cleared the doorway, he sped to the right. A moon was peering over the trees, and he could see Sam moving forward beside him. Beyond Sam hurried Driscoll, poising the machete, and beyond Driscoll Mr. Martin. Still the dogs howled. The moonlight struck through even as they advanced at a swift trot, keeping side by side. Randy saw the open ground by the fence that confined the pigs. A churning, leaping flurry of movement showed there. The wild dogs. Their shrill hubbub sounded louder.
"Hold your fire,"
Sam muttered above him.
"I don't think we'll need bullets."
But Randy saw a dark, swift thing whizzing toward him in the moonlight. He had an instant's impression of glowing eyes, bared white teeth. The wolfish dog. Up came his rifle. Then a charging white blotch shot forward under his very elbow. White blotch met dark blotch with an audible shock of impact, and a single blended snarl resounded. Two forms rolled over and over, the wolf dog and Rebel locked in combat. One of them yelped. It wasn't Rebel. Still hurrying forward, Randy leaped high to clear them as they grappled. He spared one glance backward as he ran ahead. Against a gleam of moonlight he saw them pull apart, then strike at each other again. Rebel's white head darted in and across like a slashing saber. Again Rebel's opponent shrieked. Rebel had taken hold somewhere. All that action took place in the time Randy spared for a backward glance. He watched no more. Rebel was doing all right without being watched. The charge had carried almost to the pig pen.
"There's that bugler dog,"
roared Mr. Martin, and the moonlight slid along his lifting shotgun.
"Don't shoot!"
yelled somebody else. Not Sam, not Driscoll. The wild dogs were fleeing in all directions. Something had driven the fight out of them. Right in front of Mr. Martin a figure stood erect, almost throwing itself against the gun muzzle. Randy saw dark spots on paleness. That figure wore the spotted cowskin jacket. It struck out with both hands and knocked the shotgun up. A blast flashed and boomed up into the sky.
"Grab him,"
Sam was ordering, and they tried to rush the strange being from all sides. But the spotted jacket whirled and ran. Mr. Martin tried to cut off its retreat, and Randy saw the fugitive break toward the pig pen. Again rose a startled cry, but a human cry this time. The retreating mystery danced and skipped like a star of the Russian ballet. It almost somersaulted in the moonlight.
"Don't get close," Sam boomed. "That chicken wire's full of electricity."
His big arms swept Driscoll and Randy back. The spotted jacket dashed away as though some magic had lent it doubled speed. Randy dropped the rifle without thinking and sprang in pursuit. As usual, he shot ahead of his slower companions. He saw the spotted back trying to draw away and drove himself to a supreme effort. Step by step he overhauled his quarry. Moonlight grew dim. They were almost under the trees at the edge of the garden. With a final gathering of all his power, he dived headlong. As Jebs had done with Randy the day before, so Randy did with the mystery prowler. He launched and hurled home a flying tackle. He felt his shoulder drive against the back of a knee, shot forward both his arms, and gathered in two straining, scissoring legs. A startled grunt echoed in his ears. Both of them smote the ground with a thump that banished the wind from their lungs. Randy could only keep his grip on the imprisoned legs, lying across them and laboring to get his breath back.
"Look out!" Mr. Martin yelled. "He's got something! A knife!"
The prisoner struggled to rise. A head and shoulders squirmed above Randy. An arm lifted. Mr. Martin caught the lifted arm with its spotted sleeve.
"Let him go, Randy," puffed Mr. Martin. "Drop that thing, you! Lie still, or I'll fire the other barrel of this shotgun."
Sam was lifting Randy to his feet.
"Are you hurt?"
he asked anxiously. "I'm okay," Randy managed to wheeze out. From somewhere behind them rose yelp after yelp of a dog getting the worst of a fight. Then running paws scurried. The beaten dog was in retreat, coming blindly toward them. A hurtling body struck Randy and tumbled head over heels. Randy himself would have gone down but for the support of Sam's powerful hand. The wolfish dog had knocked itself sprawling. Rebel, pursuing, was upon it. Cries resounded, loud enough to deafen the whole gathered group.
"Call your dog off,"
gasped the stranger in Mr. Martin's grip.
"Take it easy, Rebel. You've whipped him,"
Driscoll told his pet, but Rebel had clamped a stubborn hold in the skin of the wolfish one's neck. For once he did not obey. Running to him, Driscoll hooked a hand in Rebel's collar, twisted strongly, and forced open the terrier's jaws. The conquered wolf dog sagged clear and weakly scrambled to his feet.
"Down, fellow,"
muttered Mr. Martin's prisoner. His own voice was husky with exhaustion.
"Down. That's right. He'll be quiet. Won't run or fight when I speak to him. Just don't let that bull terrier kill him."
"Who's that talking?" Randy found strength to demand.
"I'd have got away, except for that shock treatment," panted the captive.
"Yes, Jeb's electric guards around the pen," said Sam. "Bring him to the house. Never mind that runaway pack of curs. He's the one we want." Let me get this weapon he's holding, said Mr. Martin, still pinning the man's wrist.
No, you don't.
Something flew through the dark and fell with a metallic clink. Where'd it go? Said Sam. Who's got a flashlight? I dropped mine back yonder. Get mine out of my pocket, said Mr. Martin, and Driscoll did so. Randy dropped to hands and knees, groping over the damp earth. Driscoll aided him with the beam. Randy rose, holding something slim and round.
What's that? A blowgun? Asked Driscoll. It's just the right size for one.
Let's have your light on the prisoner, said Sam. Driscoll turned the flash around. The man in Mr. Martin's grasp flung his free arm across his face.
Don't turn it in my face,
he pleaded.
Hobart Tasman,
cried Sam. They gathered, staring in utter amazement. The pottery maker still hid his eyes. Bring him back to the house, Sam said. Move him along, Jim. Randy, better get that rifle you chucked away so free and reckless a moment ago. Randy trotted ahead to repossess the rifle. The others followed. Only the wolfish dog waited where he had been told to stand. Rebel moved toward him, stiff-legged and breathing fiercely. Better tell your pal to come along, Mr. Martin ordered Tasman, who clicked his tongue. The wolf dog moved obediently in his wake. Near the pig pen, Randy bent to retrieve the rifle. He ran his hands over it to remove the dirt. Jibs, shouted Sam Cohill. Turn off the power. We got what we were looking for.
Roger,
called back Jebs. Driscoll had caught up with Randy.
So it wasn't Willie Dubbin after all,
he said.
But how can it be Hobart Tasman? Randy almost moaned. I would have taken my oath that he was totally blind.
I'll go ahead and turn on the lights in the house,
Driscoll said. Trotting past the others, he slipped inside. A moment later, the kitchen door and windows gushed light. As Randy entered, Jebs met him.
How'd you like my own personal patented blitz weapon? He asked triumphantly.
I'm just beginning to realize what you did with that wire netting, said Randy. These dogs danced and hopped around as if you'd given them a hot foot.
Well, that's just pure down what I did give them, laughed Jebs. I rigged a connection from those chunks of netting to the house and coupled it onto Lee Martin's electric railroad transformer. Then I unscrewed the bulb in the bedroom and plugged it in there. The transformer cut down the power. There wasn't enough to kill or damage anyone, but enough to make them frisky. That pack closed in with every mouth set for a nice midnight snack of fresh hog meat, and I lighted up like a bunch of neon signs.
Here come the others,
said Driscoll. Mr. Martin tramped in, towing his smaller captive along by the shoulder. Sam followed like a bearded walking derrick.
Stay outside and guard your own prisoner, Rebel,
commanded Driscoll from beside the door. Hobart Tasman stood in the center of the kitchen floor. His arms, clad in spotted cowskin, crossed themselves defensively over his face. Into the front room with him, said Sam. Get moving, Tasman.
I can't see,
came a muffled protest.
Can't see,
Mr. Martin repeated. You can see better than any one of us, the way you dashed around out there in the dark. Turn on the front room lights, Jebs, Sam was saying. We'll all do better in there. Jebs hurried to snap switches. The front room sprang into comforting brightness. Mr. Martin brought Tasman in and thrust him into a chair.
But he's blind, Jebs stammered. How could he...
I can't see,
said Hobart Tasman, turning his head slowly from side to side. His staring eyes showed pale, opaque-looking pupils.
Not in here. Strong light always blinds me.
Well, Sam Cohill hunched his massive shoulders in a shrug of amazement. So you were fooling us all the time.
I fooled you the best I could,
said Tasman. He did not sound sullen or defiant, only helpless. You aren't blind at all, accused Sam.
But he was blind, put in Randy. He was blind day before yesterday, at least. I made a test of my own. I shoved a book almost against his eyes, and he didn't know it was there. He couldn't see a thing. Not then, anyway.
I can't see in the daytime,
Tasman explained in the same hopeless voice.
Only in dim light, twilight and moonlight, times when most people just grope around. Out there in your yard, my eyes could work fairly well. And here, with all these lamps blazing all around me, I'm as blind as a day-old puppy.
I still can't make out this thing he had,
Driscoll put in, turning the tube-like object over and over in his hands.
I saw that at the house that burned down, announced Randy. It was the mysterious thing in the pocket of that cowskin coat. At first I thought it was a whistle.
It is one, said Sam, taking it in turn. But it doesn't blow, Randy argued. You can't hear it. It's a supersonic whistle. I've seen them before. A man I knew in my show days used one to signal his trained dogs.
What is it? Asked Jebs. How does it work?
It makes a blast that's too high in pitch for human ears to hear, said Sam. But dogs hear better than we do. They can pick up its signals and obey them. His stern bearded face stooped above the slim figure in the chair. Tasman must be something of a dog trainer himself. I think the best thing he can do is explain this crazy business, suggested Mr. Martin. The clay potter's lean, weary head nodded agreement. All right, said Tasman. I'll explain. Then you can decide whether it was a crazy business or not. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. This LibriVox recording's in the public domain. Chapter 18. To See in the Dark. These boys here, Jebs Markham and Randy Hunter, have already heard the public part of my life story, began Tasman. He spoke quietly, slowly, as though to be sure everyone understood. I come from the mountains in the western part of North Carolina. I hoped to work my farm there and study natural history. Then I went blind. It's the light of day that makes me blind. I'm completely without sight when it's really bright. But when the sun sets, the darkness comes to the earth. But not to me. My blindness goes away then. I can make out objects and find my way around in the dusk of evening or by moonlight.
Would you feel better if we doused these lights?
Asked Driscoll with sudden sympathy. He might be trying to play some trick, warned Mr. Martin.
But look,
said Driscoll.
Even if we cut off the lights in here, the glow from the kitchen will trickle in. Let me do it.
He flicked the switch. At once the front room light was gone. Only a gentle diffusion came from the rear of the house, enough to see by with an effort. My power of sight's coming back, said Tasman after a moment. Well, don't get up, Sam cautioned him. Sit where you are and go on with your story. Maybe if I'd been blind both night and day, I'd had to go to some sort of hospital or home, continued Tasman. But when I knew I could count on being able to care for myself during dark hours, I made my plans to stay independent. I explained to Randy and Jebs how I had to leave the mountains. You can't grope around on those high places at night. I hired someone to drive me to Lee County in the level central part of the state. I knew there was good clay in Lee County. I had rent money coming in for my farm, and I thought I might make more, enough to live by, with pottery. I'd taught myself to make it by touch, you know. It's not too hard to do that. Lots of blind people work the potter's wheel.
And you had friends who'd sell anything you finished and ship off to 'em, prompted Randy.
Yes, so I rented an old tenant house in the woods, close to Lee County's western line. I began sleeping until noon of every day. That left only a few hours until evening. When evening came, my eyesight would return.
Sure enough, said Jebs. All of your eyesight?
Well, maybe not all. It's blotchy, if you know what I mean. It's as if I can see around the edge of something. Sidelong, you might say. But by night, I'd go out into the woods of Lee County and study the nature of night. It was a different sort of nature than the daylight kind. You see bats and moths and night birds. There's an entirely different stir of life in the darkness. The hunting animals are out, said Sam. Exactly. And the raccoons go down to the streams to fish. Certain flowers that look like buds by day open into wide blossoms. A lot of things were new to me, coming from the mountain country as I did, and I was glad to learn about them. Of course, I didn't see much of other folks. My neighbors were farm people. They worked from early dawn to sunset and went to bed at 9 o'clock. They'd think I was strange, uncanny. I didn't tell any of them I could see at night. I'd quarreled with my cousins and didn't keep in touch with them. So I was left pretty much to myself for a while. Then I found some friends. He paused, smiling. Other people out in the night? Asked Sam. It began like this. I was sitting beside a creek on a moonlit night, something like this one. I had my fishing line in the water. Then I heard a noise in the brush, and a dog came out.
He acted timid. He watched me closely. I spoke to him, and then I threw him the fish I'd caught a minute before. He acted glad to get it. The other dogs came out into the open. They looked hungry, too, and I had plenty of fish, so I gave them all some. I caught them fish for hours. They were grateful. When I walked back home through the dark, they came along. They acted like a kind of escort.
And you made friends with them? Randy asked.
Can you imagine how good it was to have them for friends? Tasman almost cried out. Seeing only at night, I was almost like somebody cast away on a desert island. Imagine being cast away alone and then getting a dog, a whole bunch of dogs, for your friends. Dogs are the best of animals to have around. They're grateful if you do anything for them. The same thing can't always be said for men.
Mark Twain remarked something like that once, observed Sam, more gently than he had spoken since Tasman's capture.
Next night those dogs were waiting to go out walking with me. I caught them some more fish. They thanked me the way dogs do. They frisked around and wagged their tails. But they liked me as well as they liked my fish. I was glad as they were. I had company at last, though I couldn't see or move until after sunset.
And those were wild dogs, huh? Said Mr. Martin.
Yes, wild dogs. A whole pack of them living in Lee County woods.
Seems to me I've read something about wild dogs there, nodded Mr. Martin. It was in the papers. One notion about where they came from is that during the hard times before the war, lots of folks moved to the other parts of the country and left their dogs behind to shift for themselves.
Well, there you are, said Tasman earnestly. You've been looking on wild dogs as villains, but do you see who the real villains were? The people who deserted their pets. What could a lonely, hungry dog do but hunt, roam the woods looking for food? People in those parts were afraid of them, fought them away from their houses. But I'd made friends with those dogs. I never had a reason to fear them, and they seemed to see that I was their kind.
Their kind? Repeated Jebs.
I was lonely, said Tasman. I was deserted. I wandered the woods at night. We understood each other.
Sam moved across to his shelf and took down a book. Go on talking, he said, and headed for the lighted kitchen.
News came out that there'd be an effort to round up the dogs and kill them, resumed Tasman. They were accused of killing stock in Lee County. By then I was with the dogs every night. It was my one pleasure. I trained them to obey my voice and to come from far off when I blew my supersonic whistle, the one you took away from me just now. There were thorns and brush that made some trouble, so I got this cowskin jacket to protect my own skin. They learned to know the jacket and me. All during the blind day, I'd look forward to a night walk with my dogs. When I heard they were in danger, I decided to save them if I could. I'd heard of this piece of half-forgotten woods.
How did you hear of it?
Interrupted Driscoll.
Lee County farmers read me newspaper articles about you boys. All about your chimney pot house and the money you found and so on. I thought my dog friends might be safe in a place like this.
So you came down here to Drowning Creek, said Driscoll.
We started at sundown one day and traveled all night. There were 10 dogs following me when I called them. We camped the next day all during the sunlight hours near Pine Bluff in Moore County.
It was Jeb's turn to break in.
You were close to where Randy and I live, he told Tasman.
We got here the next night, continued Tasman. I made myself a shelter. The Indians on the shores of Drowning Creek were friendly and helped me build a permanent cabin. They were sorry for what seemed to be a blind, helpless man. When my potter's wheel and baggage were shipped by truck, the Indians carried those things in. I paid them for their trouble, and here we were.
Here you were, accused Mr. Martin, figuring to feed your dog pack on pigs and chickens belonging to other people.
They were hungry, Tasman argued. Game was scarce.
How long did you think you'd get away with it? Mr. Martin demanded.
I didn't think I'd need to make many raids, pleaded Tasman. I caught fish for them the way I'd done in Lee County. I spent what money I could spare for more food, and I planned to build some pens of my own, raise chickens and maybe a few sheep.
All that for dogs? Asked Randy.
You people still don't understand. I was all alone and cut off by blindness from the daytime world. I stuck by my friends. They were hungry dogs, with nobody to depend on but me.
They're no friends of mine, said Randy. They tried to kill me.
Stop and think, said Tasman. Where did they find you?
Why, at that deserted old house.
Yes.
Tasman leaned forward, gazing through the dimness with his eyes that saw in weak light.
They were used to finding me there. We often met at that place. I kept my jacket and whistle there. When you blew that whistle, it fetched them. They thought you were a trespasser. You have a dog here. What would you expect him to do if somebody poked in here when you were gone?
I see your point, Randy admitted.
Where is Rebel, by the way? Asked Jebs.
Outside, guarding that big bad wolf, said Randy. Only Mr. Tasman argues that he's a fairly decent citizen.
I told him to be quiet, said Tasman. He won't cause trouble.
Mr. Martin raised his voice.
Sam, how about opening the back door and letting both those dogs in? I want to look at them.
Go ahead, seconded Tasman, and a moment later the two beasts strolled in. First the wolf dog, then Rebel close behind. Rebel's eyes were fixed on his late opponent, but he did not offer to resume battle.
Sit down by me, boy,
said Tasman, and the gray dog did so. Tasman stroked his large pointed ears.
You see, he said, he's gentle when you know him.
He really acts like a well-trained pooch, admitted Mr. Martin. Go on with your story, Tasman.
I knew something was up when Sam Cohill and others came to my place looking for Randy, resumed Tasman. After they were gone, I heard commotion far off. Some of the dogs came to try and tell me something.
They came to your house? Said Randy. I used to worry about that.
Oh, they were always around my house, Tasman told him.
Were they there when I was reading to you?
When I'd hear you coming, I'd tell them to go get out of sight. But whenever you read out of that Seton book, there were half a dozen dogs within earshot all the time.
Mr. Martin was looking at the wolf dog.
Will he let me touch him?
Yes,
said Tasman, and Mr. Martin too stroked the gray fur. Rebel kept a silent, calculating watch.
Well,
Tasman wound up,
that's my story. The story of an outcast. I ran with the wild dogs. They were hungry, and I figured to borrow some meat from the neighbors. It would tide them over until I could raise enough food myself to take care of them. I didn't get away with it. You caught me. What happens now?
Let me answer that, said Sam, striding in from the kitchen with his book. Tasman, he said, do you know what ails your eyes?
I'm blind by day and I can see by night.
Yes, but why? Did you ever talk to a doctor about them?
Once. I told Randy and Jebs. I got scared and angry and walked out of his office.
If you'd stayed in his office, he'd have told you have cataracts, Sam informed him. As soon as you mentioned this night vision of yours, I checked the facts in my encyclopedia.
Cataracts? Repeated Jebs. I've heard about them.
They're caused by a hardening of the crystalline lens, Sam explained. Your eye has a lens at the front of your pupil, like a camera, to focus the light so that you can see clearly. Sometimes that lens hardens and gets milky and you go blind. But in some cases, the trouble starts in the center. At first it dims only the middle part of the lens and doesn't reach the rim. That's why you can see at night.
It sounds like a fairy tale, said Driscoll.
No, it's simple science, Sam insisted. You know how the pupil of the eye gets big and wide as the light grows dim.
That's right, agreed Randy. Daylight contracts the muscles of the iris, then toward evening the iris opens out again.
And that's how things are with you, Tasman, elaborated Sam. It's at the center of the crystalline lens in each eye that there's a big lump of hard, opaque tissue. When the pupil widens, you see out around that lump. You have a ring of vision around the central cataract.
I might have read up on that, said Tasman, but I only saw at night. I couldn't make out print.
And the blindness will spread and be complete, said Sam, by dark and by daylight.
It will,
said Tasman wretchedly. But don't you know that an operation will remove the cataract? Remove the whole lens, demanded Mr. Martin. How can he see with that part of his eye gone? They can fit him with spectacles to take the place of the natural lens, said Sam. Then he can see by day as well as by night.
Mean that?"
asked Tasman, with a voice that shook. "Let's have a real doctor look at you," said Sam. "You know, fellows, no real damage was done by Tasman or his dogs. I'm willing to call things quits."
"So am I,"
said Driscoll. "All of us," wound up Mr. Martin. "Stay here tonight, Tasman," invited Sam. "Tomorrow morning Driscoll can drive you to Laurinburg. He'll help you find an eye specialist to check on those cataracts and tell you exactly what you can expect about 'em." It had been done. Another evening fell, and all of them sat in the yard of New Chimney Pot House. Tasman, Big Sam, Randy, Jebs, Driscoll, and Mr. Martin. Near them lounged Rebel, his eyes and nose turned toward the woods.
"I know that wild dogs are hanging around somewhere out there, Rebel," Driscoll said to his pet, "but they aren't going to raid us."
"No," said Tasman. "Not unless I signal them, and I won't."
"So the doctor gave you a good report?" Mr. Martin asked Tasman.
"He says an operation in spectacles will handle everything," replied Tasman. "He's writing to a specialist at Duke University Hospital up at Durham. That's where I'll go to be operated on."
"And then you'll head back to your mountains," added Randy.
"I'm glad I never sold my farm," Tasman said happily. "I can work there and study nature the way I hoped to once."
"How about the dogs?" asked Jebs.
"Bugler goes with me and one or two more. As for the others—"
"Let me speak for that wolf dog," said Mr. Martin quickly. "I've had him over at my place all day. Lee likes him, and even Willie Dubbin's getting over his nervousness. You did a wonderful job training him, Tasman. He'll be a champion watchdog and hunting dog." "Some of the Indians would like to choose from the pack," contributed Sam. "They even want to send off for supersonic whistles to control their new dogs. And I'll pass the word to a couple of neighbors who'd like good dogs and won't jabber too much about all this business," offered Mr. Martin.
"What about the charges against me?"
said Tasman. "What charges?" Sam grinned. "I'm the special deputy in charge of clearing up the wild dog business, remember? Well, it's cleared up. Nobody been hurt, nobody need worry about it anymore."
"The doctor says I ought to be back on my mountain farm by late summer," Tasman told them. "All of you will be welcome to visit me there."
"Jebs and I want to come," said Randy.
"And I'll be glad to see both of you," returned Tasman. "When I say I'll see you, I mean just that."
Rebel moved forward a pace, alert in the evening. "Is somebody coming?" asked Sam.
"Just Bugler, I think," said Tasman.
The spotted dog had come out from among the trees. Slowly he approached the group.
"Steady, Rebel. He's okay,"
cautioned Driscoll. Rebel stood where he was. Bugler trotted close to him. The two dogs sniffed noses like friends. End of Chapter 18. An End of Wild Dogs of Drowning Creek by Manly Wade Wellman. Read by Ben Tucker.